Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment, where are you watching from and the time you are watching this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. I found a priest's diary from 1910. The contents of it haunt me to this day. I've been working for a cleaning company for a couple of years now, and you see some weird stuff. But nothing compares to what happened at the old Fisher house. The memory of that day still crawls under my skin, and sometimes I wonder if I'll ever shake the feeling that something is watching me, something dark. It started like any other job. Mrs. Fisher had passed away a few weeks ago, and her family wanted the place cleaned up so they could sell it. The house was big, a dusty old thing in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to swallow up the sunlight. It was one of those places that immediately felt wrong the moment you stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the smell of rot and neglect. Every step I took on the creaky wooden floors echoed through the empty rooms, the only other sound being the wind outside rattling the broken windows. I started in the living room, wiping down furniture and sweeping the floor, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. It was in one of the upstairs bedrooms where I found it. A small, leather-bound diary tucked under a loose floorboard. The diary looked ancient, the pages yellowed and brittle, the leather cracked from age. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just some old family keepsake. But when I opened it, something changed in the air around me. The first page was written in shaky, old-fashioned handwriting, dated July 12, 1910. It was signed by a priest named Father Augustine. His words were strange, like he was documenting something terrible that had happened. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. I write this to recount the horrors that befell the village of St. Cuthbert, for my soul will never rest until the truth is known. I kept reading, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. It began with the children. Their laughter twisted into screams, and their eyes turned black as night. One by one, they fell to the curse, speaking in tongues, writhing like serpents upon the ground. At first, we thought it was a sickness, but it was not of this world. It was the work of the devil himself. The room suddenly felt colder, and I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But the house was empty. I was alone. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to keep reading. I was called to the village when the first child died. Her body twisted in unnatural ways, her mouth open in a silent scream. The villagers whispered of demons, of something unholy that had come to our land. I did not believe them. I was a man of God. I was a fool. The first exorcism failed. Deus in adiutorium meum intendi. The words of the ritual did nothing. The child laughed, a laugh that was not her own. She spoke to me in the voice of 1,000 serpents, mocking God, mocking my faith. And then she died, her body turning cold and stiff in my arms. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a creeping sense of dread that was getting harder to ignore. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know more. I opened the diary again, flipping through the pages. The priest's handwriting grew more frantic as the entries went on, his Latin prayers scattered throughout the text, as if he were desperately trying to cling to his faith. I have seen the face of evil. It wears the skin of the innocent, but its soul is black. The demon is no longer in one body. It moves through the village like a plague, corrupting, consuming. I tried to perform another exorcism tonight. It went wrong, so very wrong. Demons me circumdederant. The demon was stronger than I could have imagined. It spoke my name. It knew me. It taunted me, saying it had been waiting for me. I could feel its presence in the room, crawling beneath my skin, filling the air with its stench. Suddenly I heard a soft creak behind me. I jumped, the diary slipping from my hands and falling to the floor. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, but the room was still empty. The shadows seemed to shift, though, moving in ways that didn't feel right. It was like something was here with me. I picked up the diary again, my hands shaking. I wanted to stop reading, but something was pulling me in, like the words had a power of their own. I flipped to the last entry, dated October 31st, 1910. The village is lost. The demon has claimed them all. Men, women, children. It moves through them like a plague, leaving only death and madness in its wake. I hear its voice in my sleep now. It whispers to me, calls to me. I know what I must do. This is no longer a battle of faith. This is survival. I will confront it tonight. Fiat voluntas tua. If these are my last words, let it be known that I fought, though I fear I fight in vain. The last line was written in shaky, barely legible script. I hear it now. It is coming for me. As soon as I finished reading, the wind outside picked up, howling against the windows. The house groaned, the floorboards creaking as if something heavy was moving through the halls. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the whispers started. They were soft at first, like the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, but they grew louder, more insistent. Words I couldn't understand, spoken in a language that made my skin crawl, the same language that Father Augustine had written in, Daemons ad te venient. The room seemed to darken, the shadows stretching across the walls, twisting and writhing like something alive. My heart pounded in my chest, and I backed toward the door, clutching the diary like it was my only lifeline. But then I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, a figure stood. It was tall, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes black and empty. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and malevolent. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the thing in the corner. Then it smiled. The smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face in half, revealing rows of sharp, blackened teeth. And then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp that seemed to echo inside my head. Fiat voluntas tua, I bolted. I ran faster than I've ever run before, down the stairs, through the darkened halls, out the front door. I didn't stop until I was in my car, slamming the door behind me and fumbling for the keys. The house loomed in the rearview mirror as I sped away, its dark windows staring after me like eyes. I never went back to the Fisher house. I quit my job the next day, moved to a new town, tried to forget everything I'd read in that diary. But I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. The whispers still come at night, creeping into the edges of my dreams, filling my mind with dark, ancient words I don't understand. And right now, as I'm writing this, I feel like I'm being watched. Like there's something standing in the corner of the room, smiling. But that was only the beginning. Our next tale is far more sinister. I'm afraid I'll see my wife again. I wish she wouldn't do that. I should have told her instead of burying my feelings until they exploded out of my mouth. Stop talking to me from another room. I screamed from the kitchen. My wife was in the front room, busy at something, probably the fish tank, and attempting to tell me about her day. We'd started the conversation in the kitchen when she characteristically left to do something else in another room. I used to follow her around, but it became apparent she would just keep leaving my vicinity until I gave up the pursuit. Then we'd have a scrambled chat filled with extended pauses and requests to repeat ourselves. I was annoyed by this quirk of hers. I'm not sure how it didn't drive her nuts. We never really conversed in any ideal or acceptable way. Bills got missed, chores left undone. We didn't delegate tasks because our communication habits sucked. What? She called back after my outburst. Fucking hell, I roared. God fucking damn fucking hell. Can you not stay in the same fucking room as me if you want to talk? You started this fucking conversation? For a stretch of too many seconds, there was quiet. For fuck's sake, answer me. Or better yet, get in here. Speak to me, to my face. Not from another room, not from a different floor. Here, now. Spittle crawled through my beard like the frothing of a mad dog. Again, nothing. No response. Fuck this. I scooped up my keys and intended to hit the road for the local pub. When I passed the front room, I hesitated. My wife wasn't there after all. Fucking bullshit. It didn't matter where she was, only that she wasn't in the same room as me. I was so pissed. I walked right by the car in the driveway. I usually parked on the street, but didn't that day for no reason I can remember, and couldn't be bothered to go back. As a result, I walked to some basement lounge featuring an awful band and skunky overpriced beer. After spending too much to get inebriated, I left on the wrong side of midnight but before last call. The calming effects of the alcohol and time were a formula for guilt. I felt bad and intended to apologize to her when I got home, unless she was sleeping. Lights in the dining room and hallway said she'd waited up. While fishing for keys, I drunkenly stumbled and shouldered the front door. It drifted open because it hadn't been fully closed. "Dear," I called. "Everything okay?" "Sure is," she chimed from the kitchen. The adjacent living room issued the noise of some reality TV show. "Why? What's up?" A girlish giggle bubbled after the questions. I sighed, already beginning to feel irked. With my shoes still on, I clomped down the hall and into the kitchen. "You left the front." The lights were off, and so was the TV. She wasn't there. "Dear?" I thought she might be hiding behind the couch. Maybe she'd felt like drinking too, and believed a light-hearted revenge prank was in order. I probably deserved it, but definitely didn't enjoy the prospect. I went to the couch, and in the only hiding spot available, there was nothing. The only other place she could have gone would be the back deck, and I would have heard the sliding door open and close. Even drunk, however, I saw the lock had been toggled shut, a feature that only worked from inside the house. "Dear?" I tried again, figuring I'd simply been mistaken about the TV and her location. "Yeah? What's up?" This time her voice and queries seemed to come from the front room. However unlikely, she must have crossed the doorway of the hallway and gone through the dining area without my noticing. Again, too much alcohol explained the inconsistency. "Dear, I'm not in the front room either, but something had changed, evidence of her passing. The light had been switched off." "Are you running away from me?" "I understand. I just want." "Dear," she called from upstairs, "would you please bring me a glass of wine, the bottle on the counter?" I huffed, but went to do her bidding, though fulfilling such requests always made me feel like a servant. A bottle of cheap Merlot, the kind we drank when we were young and broke, waited accusingly by the microwave. Half had already been drunk, another intentional symbol of what had been lost in our relationship. Pretty passive-aggressive, I thought. "Dear?" she called from our bedroom as I brought the wine, but again the lights were off. She wasn't there waiting. "Dear?" I echoed back. "Where are you?" "What do you mean? I'm over here." She sounded happily confused. The master bathroom. Light came from under the closed door. The shower had hissed and the glass door banged shut. She wanted to drink in the shower, of course. But when I went in, there again nothing was as it should be. No bathroom lights, no shower, no wife. I began to feel uneasy. "Dear, what's going on?" "Dear?" she called from elsewhere. "The wine. Where are you?" Each time I asked, my voice seemed quieter. "Over here," she said impatiently. I went back into the hallway. She'd shut off the lights there too. There were 2 other bedrooms and another bathroom behind closed doors that always stood open before. "Where?" "Here," she shrieked, and it seemed as if her lips grazed my ear. I spun. Some of the wine spilled onto the hardwood. "Over here, dear." The second bathroom. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. Light slid from under the door. Another faucet came on. She had no reason to use that tub. We never used it. It was dirty from neglect. Praying to a god I never believed in didn't help. The bathtub wasn't running. The lights were off. No one inside. "What the hell is going on?" I bellowed before shivering and flinching when she called again. "Dear?" Her voice became patient again and seemed to be downstairs. Had she somehow slipped behind my back? The lights had to be a trick. The shower and the tub too. It could only be revenge. Nothing else made sense. "Stop running," I shouted. "I'm trying to bring your wine, the wine you asked me to bring." I tried to laugh, but the sound died in my throat as lights from the front hall stretched lazily up the stairs and into the dark hallway where I could hardly dare to move. "Dear," she shouted, again close. "Dear?" Again far, possibly the basement or garage. "Dear," once more, like the final breath of the dead. My nerves snapped, and I wobbled forward to the top of the stairs. I had to get out of here. I had wandered into the wrong house. A nightmare. Down, down, down the steps into shadows instead of the light promised a moment ago. Hands stiff and useless, I tried the door. The deadbolt had been thrown by me. I always locked up everything at night. It stuck a little sometimes. Pulling on the handle and turning the switch required 2 hands. Remarkably, I hadn't dropped the wine in my panicked state. Placing the glass on the nearby end table, I ignored another call from her. Dear, where are you trying to go? I'm not out there. No one is out there. Her words overlapped one another. No human being talks like that. It cannot be my wife. I opened the front door to be confronted by an unusually dense fog, full of swirling tendrils reaching forward, coming for me like clawed fingers. All of my short, rapid breaths inhaled the fumes and smothered my airways. I fell to my knees. My vision began to fade, but not before I saw the legions of tortured visages in the gloom. All seemed to beg for relief until they realized I could do nothing. Their collective anger erupted into a cursed howl. Or maybe they were warning me. I fell backward into the house before the first foggy finger could reach the threshold. Then I kicked shut the door and fought unconsciousness until I could cough up whatever plague now lives in the new eternal night outside my home. I could breathe. I could breathe. That's all that mattered until, dear, what's up? Cheerful. Too cheerful. I practically whispered back, nothing, dear. I picked up the wine and have been trying to bring it to her ever since. It's an endless journey through my house. She does not let me stop. If I try, the calls come sharper, louder, and with promises of harm and death. The wine, I'll have your skin. I write on my phone while on the move. I cannot get out. I am going to die soon, I'm sure. This message is both a plea and a warning. Help me if you can. Help my wife. I don't know what she has become. Be kind to your significant other. You'll miss those pet peeves when they're gone. They are part of the person you love. I should have been patient. I shouldn't have given up following her. I shouldn't have yelled. I miss my wife. I'm afraid I won't see her again. I'm afraid I will. It'll be the end soon if I don't. It will be death, I know, if she lets me find her, if I see the horror I have made. If you thought that was terrifying, just wait. There's something darker lurking in the next story. This is why I'm not afraid of the dark. My name is Allison Marshall, Alice for short, and I'm not afraid of the dark. I was around 11 to 12 when I found the old teddy bear under my bed. I was drawing and dropped my crayon between the gap. I got out of bed and grabbed my flashlight. Bringing myself down to the ground, I shunned the light underneath to find a teddy bear lying next to my crayon. As soon as the light hit it, the bear sat up and looked at me. I gasped and turned the flashlight off while quickly getting back up on my feet. Doubting what I seen, I crouch and point the light back to the bear, who once again sat up and stared at me. Being a curious child, I experimented with the bear, who would only move in the light. Didn't move at all when in the dark. I remember having little play dates with the teddy bear after my mother would go to sleep. Bonding over the following days. Eventually, I adopted my newfound friend as Barry the bear. There was a particular game Barry liked to play, hide and seek, but instead of hiding to have me find him, Barry would collect certain objects like a doll, a jack-in-the-box, and a cymbal monkey. This game of hide and seek followed different rules. I turned the light off to let Barry wander in the dark. I count to 10 and turn the light on. I then make my guess to which toy Barry is currently behind. I pointed at the cymbal monkey, to which the jack-in-the-box popped out on its own. Light off then on, I pointed at the doll, to which the monkey started jumping. Light off and on, I pointed at the jack-in-the-box. It popped out and I cheered victoriously. One night I was too tired to play, so I went straight to sleep. The light in my mother's room came on and the sound of glass breaking woke me up. I got up and went to go check on her. She stood there lifeless. I poked her arm to see if she was okay. She turned her head, revealing a wide, uncanny smile on her face, her eyes completely black. I stepped away and asked if she was all right. She pushed me into the hall and walked over to the drawers. I ran to my room and locked the door. I then sat in the darkest corner of my room and waited. Some time passed and the house was completely silent. I quietly walked towards the door and peeked under it. A kitchen knife came swinging through the gap, sinking directly into my right eye. I screamed in horror and pulled away, my hand on my injured eye as blood rushed out. I used my free hand to open the window, then slid under my bed. I covered my mouth as my mother used the knife to slide past the lock and burst the door wide open. A burning candle was shoved into her mouth as a light source. The wax melted away at her cheeks and chin. She headed to the window, and just as she peeked her head over, I came out from under the bed and pushed her. Her body fell down 4 stories and landed on the trash can below. I looked out the window once, then went to the living room to call 911. They showed up a few minutes later and took me to the hospital. Over the years, I went home to home and eventually grew out of foster care. I now work as a tattoo artist in the downtown area and live in a simple studio apartment. Several doctors offered me glass eyes, but I stuck with an eye patch as a reminder of that night. It took a while to get over my fear of light. I was paranoid for a long time and only stayed in dark areas, taking only the night shifts. But as I grew older and the more time I had to process, it finally came to me. How Barry switched from toy to toy. Possessing my mother, it was never the toys or my mother. It was their shadow. The nightmare doesn't end there. Let me take you deeper into the unknown. Someone knocks at my door at 3:33 a.m. every night. I wish I didn't find out who it was. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking was barely loud enough to pull me out of my sleep. With my eyes drooping from tiredness, I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 3:33 a.m. Who the hell was at my door at 3 in the morning? With my back still hurting from the unpacking at this new apartment, I got up and slowly walked to my door. The white-painted wooden door looked as if placed in the spotlight by the moonlight coming from the window. I swing open the door, and no one. Whoever decided to break my sleep in the night was already gone. Maybe a drunk neighbor knocked on the wrong door before realizing their mistake. Who knows? I closed the door and retired back to my cozy sleep. You can't blame me for not suspecting more. How could I have known the knocking would come back the next night? Knock, knock, knock. The knocking came back, breaking my sleep yet again. My eyes shot open, and I checked my phone in frustration. 3:33 a.m. I'd had a terrible day, so naturally, I stomped furiously out of the bedroom toward my door. This is my second day in this bloody place, and you all can't even let me sleep. I swing open the door with a frown visible on my face. There was no one. Of course, I grunted, locked the door, and after mourning my interrupted sleep, decided to hit the bed again. The knocking continued for another 3 days, leaving me restless each night. It was the same thing at the same time each night. 3 knocks at 3:33 a.m. The constant commotion had robbed me of sleep, and my exhaustion festered into anger. I was going to find out who was doing this. So I sat on my sofa all night, waiting for 3:33 a.m. By the time the clock hit it, I was struggling to keep my eyes open with all the willpower I had. As soon as the clock hit 3:33, I jumped up, ran to the door with all the anger that had piled up through the nights, and swung open the door yet again, to an empty hallway. Motherfucker lucked out today, I whispered, and then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. But this time the knocking did not come from the main door. It came from behind me. My body grew cold and my anger was replaced with a realization that made my spine shiver. Slowly and unwillingly, I turned around. The knocking had come from my bedroom door, which was shut close. Was someone in my bedroom? Was I in danger? What should I do? Should I call the cops? All the adrenaline pumped by my anger had dried out while I contemplated what to do. Hello? Is anyone there? I asked loudly. When no answer came back, I slowly went and turned the doorknob of my bedroom. As the door squeakily opened, it revealed my bedroom with someone in it. All my blood dried and I stared at the person laying in my bed, unable to move a muscle as if I were in sleep paralysis. The person was me. I watched my mangled body with its blood-red eyes and mouth that was frozen in its scream. And then the door flew shut in my face, knocking me back on the living room floor. My eyes swelled up and I curled into a little ball and cried for the remainder of the night, unable to process the fact that I just saw my very own dead body. I must have dozed off, because the next thing was me waking up the next night. With a dried mouth and tired eyes, I crawled my way to my phone in the living room and checked the time. I was a minute early. I waited for a minute until 3:33 a.m. hit. Knock, knock, knock. Even though I was curled up just in front of the main door, I couldn't muster the courage to open it. But then it flew open, showing me the empty hallway. I kept staring at the empty hallway, and after a while noticed that the roof had a person stuck to it. And then, without warning, the figure dropped with a loud thud. I screamed and cried as I saw the person was my body. Laying on the floor, it looked at me with its dead eyes that bled tears of blood. "Please stop," I cried. It did not stop, though. Every night I pass out from exhaustion after crying only to wake moments before the inevitable knock. I don't eat or drink anymore. What's the point? The knocks have shown me so many ways that I can die, each one worse than the last. I can't take this anymore. I want to escape, but the doors won't let me. I am writing this at 3:30 a.m. Only 3 minutes until the knocking shows another death of me. I just wish this time it kills me for real, because I am scared. I am scared that this is going to continue forever. What you've heard so far was chilling, but the next story will haunt your dreams. I spent the night inside a house that feeds on personal demons. The nights are the worst. The few minutes of sleep come with nightmares, the kind that stay with me for days on end. But even that is better than what I've been carrying inside since birth. I've always been of the belief that some people are born with monsters attached to their mind. A dark companion, an unseen creature in the passenger seat of this car called life. Happiness? I do not know. I have never once been happy about anything. Relationships come and go. It's good for a little while, but the result is the same every time. Nothing brings joy, and my life is hell. The sun has never shone on my dead-end street, and it never will. I am 100% sure of this. Apathy is my middle name. Anxiety lives inside me. Depression flows through my crooked veins. Each day brings along with it the same bitter reality. Endless agony. Yet I am not alone. I don't know what or who accompanies me, but I can always sense when it's here. If you're like me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've called this companion Mr. Musician. Whenever he comes to me, my soul turns into this sad and depressing violin song. If I close my eyes, I see a large room filled with faceless people dressed in black and wearing white gloves staring at me. I know I am on a stage. I don't see anything else except them. But I know behind me there's my monster, my eventual demise, Mr. Musician. And he plays his song slowly, and he caresses the violin's chords with his deadly bow. Often, I imagine the violin to be my own beating heart, and Mr. Musician pulls away at its strings until they will all eventually break. A timely death of all things beautiful. Yet, that time isn't now. I want to heal. I want to know how good life tastes like. I want to slurp the nectar and honey of happiness. I thought about doing this thing for a long time now. I know it will work, but it takes a lot of courage to go inside that old house. Some people say the house is demonic, built by the devil himself ages ago. One thing is true. No one really knows who the house belongs to, who built it, or how old it is. This adds to the aura of mystery surrounding this old wooden construction. Others say it heals you on the inside, takes away all your problems, and makes you alive again. It grabs a hold of all your broken parts and glues them back together. The miracle house. One must spend 24 hours inside. Only after that, one can say the healing of mind and soul is complete. Most people I've talked to said only it works, but didn't disclose any details about the events that occur in the miracle house. After all, it is a deeply personal experience. However, I will tell you all about mine because why not? There is nothing to be hidden from you. And maybe it will help others build up the courage to face their demons and even kill them once and for all. I have never felt as anxious as I did before stepping foot in that house. From the outside, it was a regular one. It smelled old and the paint had peeled off. The steps were filled with dust and dirt, signs of no one living there anymore. The only thing off was that the windows painted black. I thought it had something to do with the passing of time. Whoever was inside mustn't know what the hour is. The front door opened, and a man came outside on the porch to greet me. Hello there. I thought the house was abandoned. Hello, mister. I suppose you're here to get rid of your demons, correct? Yes. Great. Do not ask me any questions, please. You need to give me your phone and any other devices you might have. Communication with the outside is prohibited. This feels odd. How do I know you won't steal my phone? The man exhaled and shook his head. He began closing the door. Wait, okay, but just so you know, I have GPS tracking activated. I won't steal anything from you, young man, but this house will. I nodded. See you tomorrow, same time. Good luck, Jack. I swallowed. How did he know my name? The man locked the door from the outside. I heard him going down the steps. Then, only silence. Dampness filled the air. In the hallway, wood burned in the fireplace. The flames cast shadows on the walls around me. They resembled little black devils dancing with excitement. An old burgundy leather chair faced the fireplace, and on it was a folded piece of paper. I opened it to read the following. Dear Jack, the Miracle House welcomes you with open arms. Please sit on the chair as you continue to read. Now, I know your pain. I've seen it before. I will take it from you. You are scared and wondering if this will work. You ask yourself if the living hell you're enduring will ever end. Dearest Jack, it will end. All of it. You won't even remember the agony in your old life. I will take this burden from you. Now focus on the fireplace. Embrace the warmth of this beautiful house. Be one with it. Your eyes begin to feel tired. You need to sleep for the next 2 hours, Jack. Sleep. And so I did. I didn't dream anything. I didn't have any violent nightmares like I usually did. It was a peaceful and restful sleep. I opened my eyes and found myself in another room. A bloodied knife appeared in my hand. I screamed and threw it on the floor. Both my arms had fresh cuts on them, but those didn't hurt, not a single bit. After the initial shock wore off, I knew something was off, but in a good way. I felt lighter than before, as if the poison in my veins had leaked on the floor and evaporated. I smiled. Was this the way to absolution? A door creaked open behind me, and I jumped. My gut told me to go through. I found myself in a place where the air reeked of bleach. The bright neon lights almost blinded me. Dirty ceramic tiles covered the whole room. A bathtub filled with black water stood in its center. Someone had taped another piece of paper on the wall. Jack, you feel lighter than ever before, don't you? You can't understand what is happening, but it's good. You want more of this. You must wash away all the rotting things inside. Darkness eats darkness. Step inside the small black ocean and let its tranquility carry you away. I got in the bathtub straight away. No hesitation. The Miracle House indeed performed miracles. I closed my eyes and relaxed. The warm water had an oily texture. Somewhere in another room, I heard a metallic sound as if someone had dropped millions of nails on the ground. My skin suddenly hurt. It burned like millions of needles punctured it. I tried getting out, but was stuck. I couldn't. A black hand extended from under the water with bony fingers and long, sharp nails. It lunged to my neck and choked me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything. The cold, dead hand squeezed my throat until I passed out. This time I woke up in a completely dark room. No light, no windows, nothing. Just blackness. Oh, my dear Jack, a voice said from a distant, cold place. You are here at last. Who are you? You know me very well, dear boy. You have known me all your life. You even gave me a name. What? Yes, you did, Mr. Musician. A wave of fear washed over me. A fear so great like never before. I was in the same room with my archenemy, my nemesis. Was this the end? Again, I sat down on a chair. I thought it to be the same chair in the hallway. You ruined my life since the day I was born. And you cut me out from your veins, drowned me, and cast me out. And now here I am. What is this place? The Miracle House, where all the pain comes to die. The place where you stay face to face with your demons. But what are you? I am you. You are my child. I have made you. I have molded you into what you are. I love you, Jack. I heard footsteps coming towards me. Stay away from me. Too late for that, Jack. You wanted me gone. You ripped me from you and brought me here. That means I'm cured. No more pain. Are you sure about that, my dear boy? Hands touched me from all directions in that pitch-black darkness. Tongues licked the fresh wounds on my wrists. Oh, the pain tastes amazing, Mr. Musician said. My stomach churned and I felt nauseous. I vomited and heard large chunks of flesh hitting the floor. They squished and hissed and made all kinds of sounds. They were suffering and dying. I felt like large tumors left my body in a rush. 2 red dots blinked at me. They studied me with inquisitive awe and disbelief. I was healing. The evil was leaving my body, never to come back in again. Now, he was a separate entity. His lies and deceiving tongue told me all kinds of things. I made you what you are. Who would you be without me, Jack? I'd be free. Do you think I will ever die? No, I will not. I'll come back again and again until your mind explodes. Do you really think this house performs miracles? Well, it got you out of my system, didn't? You are scared too right now. You don't know what to do with this new reality you find yourself in. Mr. Musician groaned with discontent. You will never survive without me, Jack. I will be part of you forever. I felt things crawling up on me. wet, sticky, emanating a foul smell. They hissed as they moved slowly. Thousands of them wanted to get under my eyeballs, up my nose, inside my ears and mouth. I tried to get them all off me, but they wouldn't let go. The vile parasites wanted to infect me and eat me from the inside out. I turned away from the voice, and the worms or small snakes relented. I walked with small steps away from wherever the hell Mr. Musician was. I hoped to find a door so I can get out of the darkness. I didn't know how much time had passed. It was impossible to tell. I heard a click below me, and I fell down a hatch. I didn't get any injuries upon landing, but I had a few seconds to adjust to the new room. When it all came into focus, I noticed the room was my living room, an exact replica. The windows were all painted black, a reminder I was still in the miracle house. Near my desk where I work and edit my videos, I noticed something I don't have in my house. A tall, rectangular mirror with an arrow paint in front of it on the beige carpet. I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. I looked healthier, as if losing a few pounds and something else on the inside. But soon the reflection didn't go along with my movements anymore. I moved right, the reflection stood still. I smiled, the reflection frowned. I waved with my left hand, the reflection's right hand extended through the mirror. The man who came out was a crooked version of me. His skin was the color of charcoal, and he had the exact same hands as the one in the bathtub. His eyes gleamed red, and his evil grin sent a crushing wave of fear down my spine. Through the mirror, he jumped at me. All this time I was you, Jack, and you were me. You are your worst enemy, and I am your worst enemy. It's a vicious, never-ending circle. It goes on and on and on like this forever. Get the fuck off me? You don't like my music anymore? Do you want to cut me out of your life? He was anorexic and spiteful. Hate filled his eyes. He hated all things holy, all things that made me human. Mr. Musician wanted me terminated there and then. I balled my fist and kicked him hard in the face. He lost control for a moment, and I managed to get up and run away for a second. I threw a chair at him and hit him in the head, and he went down barely moving. Then I elbowed the mirror, took a shard of glass and put it into his side. Black liquid started oozing on the carpet. It burned through the fabric like hot tar. The evil me, Mr. Musician, pulled the shard out and like nothing stood up. He came toward me and pinned my body to the wall and pressed it against my stomach. Guess one of us dies today, huh, Jack? Tears welled my eyes and went down my cheeks like raging rivers. To conquer your fear, you must face it. I am not afraid of you anymore, Mr. Musician. Yeah, tell yourself lies, Jack. That works only in the movies. He cut my stomach and put his hand through the wound. I could feel his hands moving around my insides, squishing whatever he could catch. I fell to my knees, blood soaking the carpet wet, the red of my inside against his poisonous black liquid. What an ugly view. Bye, Jack. I faded to black. I woke on the front porch of the house feeling like a different person. I don't know what happened after Mr. Musician happened. I don't know where he went. My phone was in my pocket. But I feel different. I feel like a new man in a new body. This world is mine for the taking now. I can see everything through different eyes. I can do whatever I want at last. There aren't two entities in the same body anymore. There is only me. One horror fades, but another waits just beyond the shadows. We drove out to an abandoned field, and we saw something horrifying. The station wagon lurched along the deserted back roads, its engine a low growl that seemed to echo through the dense fog, clinging to the outskirts of town. The city lights were long gone, swallowed by the dark. Robert Usted's eyes flicked repeatedly to the rearview mirror. There was no one behind him, but he kept checking, just in case. He gripped the steering wheel, fingers stiff and pale, jaw set tight. Paranoia had seeped into every thought, every nerve. He wasn't escaping. This wasn't about getting away. This was about proving a point, one final message to the ones who had hunted him, who had turned his life into a cornered animal's nightmare. In the back seat, two small bodies lay crumpled and limp. The soft glow of the dashboard threw their faces into harsh relief, empty eyes staring into nothing. There was a metallic smell hanging in the air, sharp and bitter. It hadn't been planned, not really. He just wanted to keep them safe, to protect them from the people who were always watching. But his own hands had betrayed him, his rage blinding him. And now, what was left of his family was gone. It was too late to turn back. His wife sat gagged beside him, eyes glazed over. She had stopped crying hours ago. There was no pleading, no desperate attempts to get through to him. Just silent tears and the rise and fall of her chest. She knew he was beyond saving, lost in the labyrinth of his own fears. The car swerved suddenly, tires skidding on loose gravel as it veered off the paved road and onto a dirt path. It kicked up a cloud of dust that hovered like a ghost in the taillights. Ahead, the outline of a fence materialized in the darkness. Beyond it, a wide, empty field stretched out under the moonlight. Skeletal trees lined the far edge, their branches like claws reaching for the sky. An old barn sagged in the distance, a hulking shadow against the pale light. This was it, the end. He turned to his wife, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. "They'll remember this," he whispered hoarsely, his voice almost swallowed by the night. "They'll remember what happened here." The device beneath his seat was crude, hastily assembled from pipes and wires packed tight with potential. It sat there, waiting. All it would take was a turn of the key. One twist, and it would be over. A single flash, and they would never forget him. She didn't react, didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far away, staring through the windshield, unseeing. It was as if she had turned to stone, her spirit drained. There was no fight left in her, no defiance. What was there to fight for? Her children, pale and still in the back seat, were beyond her reach. The last shreds of her resistance had crumbled away. She was empty now. A shell, caught in a nightmare that had no end. Robert's hand hovered over the key. His breathing slowed. This place, this field, these trees, would become a marker, a scar. He could see them out there, hidden in the darkness. The ones who had driven him to this. They would understand. He would make them understand. His lips curled into a thin smile, his grip tightening on the key. The explosion shattered the night. A violent, blinding burst of fire tore through the vehicle, metal folding inward like paper. Shards of glass and twisted steel rained down as the flames roared, engulfing everything. The blast seemed to consume the sky itself, a towering inferno that burned brighter than day. Then, silence. The kind of silence that felt final, the kind that smothered everything. Smoke billowed up in thick, black plumes, blotting out the stars. Somewhere, deep in the pasture, horses whinnied in terror, their dark shapes bolting in every direction. Their hooves pounded the earth, a chaotic rhythm against the stillness of the night. The field, once peaceful and quiet, was a smoldering ruin. Shattered glass glinted in the firelight, and twisted metal lay strewn like bones. The barn stood untouched, a silent witness to the madness that had consumed Robert Usted. All that remained was a charred shell and the acrid scent of scorched earth, a testament to a man who had lost everything and left nothing but destruction in his wake. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft rustle of pages being turned, the occasional crackle of the fire, and the low rumble of distant thunder rolling in from the horizon. Each of us sat around the cozy living room, hunched over our own copies of Paranoia, eyes fixed on the lines describing the final, horrific moments of Robert Usted's delusion-driven rampage. The words painted vivid, gruesome pictures in my mind. The shattered glass, the fire, the blood. It was the kind of story that gripped your chest and refused to let go. As I turned the last page of the chapter, my hand trembled slightly. Stacy's voice broke the tension first. "Holy hell," she breathed, lowering her book slowly, as though the weight of what she'd read still lingered in her hands. That was intense. She looked up at us wide-eyed, the excitement in her expression tinged with something darker. A sliver of fear, maybe? She brushed her hair back behind her ear, as if trying to shake off the lingering discomfort. "I can't believe they managed to capture it so well. The dread, the absolute madness of it all." Axel nodded, his own copy closed now, resting on his lap. He glanced at her, then over at Margaret and me, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I think I need a drink after that," he joked, though his voice held an edge of unease. "It's like I can feel the crazy radiating off the pages." Margaret set her book down gently beside her on the sofa, her gaze distant, unfocused. "It's tragic," she murmured. "The children, the wife. It's hard to imagine what it must have been like for her. I mean, knowing she was going to die and just not fighting anymore." She shook her head slowly, hugging her arms around herself. Reading it made me feel sick, like I was there in that car, feeling everything she must have felt. I know, I agreed quietly. The flames of the fire seemed to cast long, wavering shadows across the room, making everything feel a little less real. The author really captured it, the sense of isolation, the paranoia. It was like you could see into Robert's head, see how the world twisted and warped around him until he didn't know what was real anymore. Stacy leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her eyes alight with the kind of excitement that only comes from being scared and fascinated at the same time. "That's what makes it so powerful, don't you think?" she said eagerly. "It's not just some gory crime story. It's the psychology of it all, the way it crawls under your skin and makes you think about how easily someone can just snap." She paused, then grinned. "That's why I wanted us all to read it." Axel's smile faltered slightly. He glanced toward the window, where the first faint flashes of lightning lit up the sky. "Well, you've succeeded," he muttered. "I'm definitely freaked out now." He glanced back at Stacy, raising an eyebrow. "But that's not why you brought us together tonight, is it?" Stacy's grin widened, a mischievous spark flickering in her eyes. "Maybe it was," she teased. "But maybe I also thought it'd be a good idea for us to, do a little field trip. A way to, what's the phrase? Get some closure." Margaret stiffened beside me. "You're not serious," she said softly. "You don't really want to go out there, do you? To that place? Well, why not? We're only a couple of miles away from the exact spot it all happened." Stacy shot back, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "We've been living with this story for weeks. We're all caught up in the fear, the mystery. It's just a field now. It's not like anything's gonna jump out at us." Axel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me. I knew he felt the same pull I did, a strange, almost magnetic curiosity. But there was something else too, something that made my stomach twist with dread. I looked at Margaret. She was staring at Stacy like she'd lost her mind. "It's just an empty patch of land," I said slowly, "and the only thing we're likely to find there is a chill from the wind." "Exactly," Stacy said, leaning back in her chair, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. "Don't you see? That's why we have to go. We have to finish what we started. It'll be like closing a chapter." The storm outside rumbled closer, and in the flickering light of the fire, no one moved. No one spoke up to say it was a bad idea. Even Margaret, who looked the most apprehensive, remained silent, her eyes shifting between the rest of us, waiting for someone else to call it off. But no one did. "We'll go now," Stacy murmured, almost to herself. She stood up slowly, like someone in a trance. "Before the storm hits, we'll go, and then we'll see what's really out there." A chill ran down my spine, but I pushed it aside. We had gone this far. There was no turning back now. The night air was heavy as we stepped out of Axel and Stacy's warm, comfortable living room and into the chill of the oncoming storm. The faint scent of rain lingered in the wind, mixing with the crisp scent of freshly turned earth and distant pine. The sky above was bruised with deep purples and angry grays, lit intermittently by flashes of far-off lightning. I could feel the storm's charge pricking at my skin, as if the very air itself was alive with anticipation. Part of me wanted to stay behind, to make up some excuse and wait it out by the fire. But another part, one I didn't want to acknowledge, urged me forward with morbid curiosity. We piled into Axel's car, nerves jittery, none of us speaking as the engine roared to life. The interior of the car was warm, but the tension was suffocating. Stacy was up front, staring out into the gathering darkness like a woman on a mission. I exchanged a look with Margaret beside me, who gave a tight, uneasy smile. She didn't want to go either, but we'd all made this unspoken pact the moment no one objected at the end of dinner. Now we were all prisoners to our own pride. The drive out to the pasture was longer than I expected. The streets grew narrower, winding through fields and clusters of trees, their bare branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. We passed darkened houses spaced far apart, their windows like blind eyes staring out into the void. Walla Walla was a small, quiet town, but this felt different. Our hometown now seemed abandoned, empty in a way it never had before. With each turn, the storm crept closer, flashes of lightning illuminating the road for split seconds before plunging us back into a hollow darkness. Thunder rumbled, louder now, a low growl that reverberated through the car and settled deep in my chest. "I can't believe we're doing this," Axel muttered suddenly, breaking the silence. He glanced back at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes shadowed and uncertain. You know, it's probably just going to be an empty field, nothing to see but grass and an old fence. Then why go at all? Margaret shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. I could see her grip tightening on her knees, hat fingers digging into the fabric of her jeans. Because we have to, Stacy said softly. Her gaze was still fixed straight ahead, unblinking. Because it's part of the story. You know how the book ends, right? We're almost at the last chapter. Yeah, in the book, I pointed out, trying to keep my tone light. But it came out strained. This isn't a novel, Stace. There's no closure out there, just an old crime scene and a creepy pasture. Exactly. She turned in her seat, eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. It's been 30 years. Maybe it's time to put the story to rest. For real. No one had a response to that. I looked out the window instead, watching the trees blur by as the road narrowed even further. The last thing I wanted was to traipse around some dark pasture where a man had killed his family. But I couldn't bring myself to say it, not when everyone else seemed determined to see this through. Finally, we turned down a dirt road, the tires crunching softly over gravel. By now, the sky had shifted from dusk to night, but the moon was low enough in the sky that its light skirted below the black clouds, illuminating the ground with an eerie, unearthly glow. Axel slowed the car, squinting out the windshield as the headlights washed over a barbed wire fence and a stretch of empty pasture beyond. The field looked almost silver under the moonlight, the tall grass rippling gently in the breeze like the surface of a dark, shimmering sea. "This is it," Axel said, his voice barely above a whisper. We got out of the car slowly, as if we were afraid of disturbing something, some delicate, invisible thread holding the world in place. The wind tugged at my clothes, and I could taste the storm on my tongue. Thunder rumbled closer now, the sky flickering with bursts of pale, cold light. The four of us stood by the fence, peering out into the expanse of the pasture. In the distance, I could just make out the faint outline of trees, black and skeletal against the horizon. The grass swayed and whispered softly in the wind, as if murmuring secrets we weren't meant to hear. "It looks normal," Margaret said quietly, almost like she was afraid to be proven wrong. Stacy nodded slowly, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe? Or relief? I couldn't tell. She reached out and placed her hand on the top wire of the fence, like the metal gleaming faintly in the dim light. "Let's just go a little way in," she said softly, just to say we did. None of us wanted to be the one to refuse, so we followed her lead. We slipped through a gap in the wire, the grass parting softly around us. It was colder here, the air biting and sharp. Each step felt heavy, like the earth itself was trying to drag us down. Axel and I took the lead, our footsteps muffled by the thick grass. Stacy and Margaret stayed close behind, their silhouettes flickering in and out of focus as the lightning flashed above. We moved deeper into the field, the fence receding into the distance behind us until it was just a dark line against the horizon. We came to another fence, this one lower than the last one behind us, perhaps 4 feet tall. It was made up of horizontal metal bars, spaced apart, leaving gaps just big enough for a person to squeeze between them. It was a cattle fence. At one time, the bars were probably painted a bright color, but now they were rusted and corrupted by time. Stacy passed right by Axel and me, and without saying a word, she began to try and climb over the fence. "That's far enough," I said, finally allowing a sliver of reason to win over my conscience. Stacy scoffed at me and looked at Axel with an expression that told him to give her permission to proceed, but he sheepishly refused with another nonverbal cue. "Cowards," she muttered as she stepped down. The night seemed to press in around us, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. Stacy stood beside me, peering around like she was searching for something. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. We all froze, straining our ears. For a moment, there was only the distant rumble of thunder. But then, faint, almost imperceptible, I caught the sound of something moving through the grass. A soft, shuffling noise, like someone, or something, was wading slowly through the tall stalks. "It's just the wind," Axel said quickly, though his voice shook slightly. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the field. "There's nothing out here." "Then why do I feel like I'm being watched?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, tight with fear. I didn't answer. I was too focused on the sound, the way it seemed to come closer, then fade away, only to creep back in again. A chill crept down my spine, every nerve in my body on edge. And then, as if summoned by the very thought, I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, a pale blur against the dark backdrop of the field. My heart stuttered, and I blinked, convinced I was imagining things. But no, there it was. A figure, ghostly white and shimmering faintly in the moonlight, standing near the far end of the pasture. It was too large to be a person, too solid to be a trick of the light. My throat tightened as the shape shifted, moving slowly toward us. "Hey, look at that." Stacy's voice was bright, almost excited. She stepped up onto the bottom rung of the fence, balancing with one hand on the top bar as she squinted out into the field. "It's just a horse." She glanced back at us, grinning, clearly unimpressed. "See, nothing creepy here, just somebody's stray farm animal." Axel seemed to relax beside me, his shoulders loosening as he peered out into the dark. "Yeah, she's right. It's probably just lost or something." He turned to Margaret and me, raising an eyebrow. "See, nothing to worry about." But Margaret didn't respond. Her grip tightened on my arm, nails digging in through my jacket. "It doesn't feel right, Jeff," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling grass. "There's something wrong with it." I couldn't shake the same feeling. There was something off about the way it moved. Too smooth, too deliberate, like it was gliding rather than walking. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "We should leave," I murmured. "Right now." "Don't be ridiculous," Stacy shot back, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just a horse, for God's sake." She raised her voice, her tone playful, almost mocking. "Hey there, horsey. Come here, sweetie. Come on, come say hi." She started making soft, coaxing noises, the kind you'd use to call a pet. Kissy sounds, little clicks of her tongue. I watched, my stomach nodding with unease, as the horse seemed to pause, its head tilting slightly in her direction. Then, slowly, it began to move again. The odd thing was, it didn't look like it was moving very fast. It was almost ambling, the way a horse might stroll leisurely across a paddock. But something about the movement was wrong. It was getting closer, quicker than it should have been, covering more ground than its slow steps should allow. One moment it was a distant shape on the far side of the field, and the next it was halfway across the pasture, its form blurring at the edges as though it were slipping in and out of focus. "What the hell?" Axel muttered, his voice tight with confusion. He leaned forward, squinting at the horse. "How is it moving so fast?" "It's not," Stacy insisted, her smile faltering slightly. "It just looks like it is. Maybe it's the moonlight, or, I don't know, fog or something." She glanced around, her gaze darting over the dark expanse of the field. "It's just a trick of the light." But even as she spoke, I saw her expression change. She stepped up higher on the fence, her hand still outstretched. "Come on, horsey," she called softly, though there was a tremor in her voice now. "Come here." The horse obliged, or at least it seemed to. It was closer again, closer than it should have been. Its body shimmered faintly in the moonlight, its pale coat almost glowing. But the closer it came, the more details I could make out, and the more wrong it looked. The legs were too long, the joints bending awkwardly. The head, which had seemed so horse-like from a distance, looked distorted now. The muzzle stretched too thin, the ears set too far back. I took an involuntary step back, bumping into Margaret. She gasped, clutching at my arm. "Jeff?" She breathed, her voice trembling. "That's not a horse." Stacy hesitated, her gaze locked on the creature as it continued its surreal approach. For a second, I thought she'd back down, that she'd see what we were seeing, but then she huffed, rolling her eyes in mock annoyance. "Stop being such babies," she said, though her voice wavered. She turned back to the creature, putting on a wide, forced smile. "Hey, horsey, come on. Come here." The horse stopped abruptly, just a few yards away. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensing. Its head lowered slightly, and it seemed to be looking at us. No, not us, at Stacy. Its eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed on her like it was studying her. "Okay, that's close enough," Axel muttered, reaching up to tug at Stacy's sleeve. "Let's get out of here." But she didn't move. Her hand was still outstretched, her fingers trembling slightly. "Come here, horsey," she whispered, almost pleading now. And then the horse tilted its head, just a fraction, enough for the moonlight to catch on its face, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The mouth, oh God, the mouth stretched too wide, the lips pulling back in a grotesque parody of a smile. Rows of teeth gleamed wetly in the pale light, jagged and uneven. Its eyes, which had seemed almost normal from a distance, were pits of darkness, bottomless and empty. "Stacy," I croaked, but my voice was a thin, useless thread of sound. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. "Get down. Now." But she didn't seem to hear me. She was frozen, staring at the thing in front of her, her arms still reaching out as if caught in some horrible trance. The horse, or whatever it was, shifted again, its head tilting the other way. Then, slowly, impossibly, and without moving its smiling mouth, it spoke, mimicking Stacy's voice in a low, haunting, twisted whisper. "Hey, come here. Come say hi." It sounded too low for us to hear, but all of us did, deep within our ear canals and in our chests. And that's when she screamed. Simultaneously, Margaret fell down, her chest colliding hard with the cold, damp ground, as though she had been pushed by an invisible force from behind. It was then that the deafening sound of running, stampeding horse hooves filled the air like an explosion, yet the white horse remained hauntingly still, glaring at us through its unearthly eyes. The sound shattered the silence, raw and terrified, echoing across the field. Axel lunged forward, grabbing Stacy around the waist and yanking her off the fence as I helped Margaret up off the ground. Stacy struggled for a moment, her limbs flailing, and then she seemed to snap back to herself, turning and bolting toward the car. "Run!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Run!" We didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted back toward the car, the grass whipping at our legs, the wind howling in our ears. The horse, or whatever it was, remained where it stood, watching us with that awful predatory smile. But even as I ran, I could feel its gaze burning into my back, following us all the way. We piled into the car, Axel slamming the door shut and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and with gravel kicking up, we tore away from the field, leaving that horrific, twisted creature behind. But even as the car sped down the narrow dirt road, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The sight of that pale, grinning face watching us go. Back in the car, we sat in stunned silence, the interior heavy with an unspoken fear that none of us wanted to address. Axel was clutching the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, staring blankly at the empty field beyond. Stacy, for once, was speechless, her face pale and eyes wide as she exchanged a horrified look with Margaret. Did you see its face?" Margaret whispered finally, voice shaky. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and nodded slowly. "Yeah," I managed. That wasn't a horse." "Hell with its face. Did you hear that thing speak? It fucking spoke. Horses don't speak like that," Axel said frantically. We sat there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The air in the car felt suffocating, and I could see everyone else was just as rattled. Stacy was the first to break the silence. "We need to find out if there's a horse that lives here," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. "What, you want to go back out there and knock on someone's door?" Axel snapped, turning to glare at her. But Stacy was already shaking her head, a wild glint in her eyes. No, we'll call them. If it's a horse they own, we'll get an answer tonight. If not, well, I don't know." "Why would anyone keep a horse like that?" Margaret muttered. "It looked wrong, like it was sick, or—" "Let's just get back home first," Axel said, plunging the car back into silence. After pulling into Stacy and Axel's driveway, we sat for a second, contemplating all that had occurred. Axel was the first to get out, and the rest of us followed. Once inside, we found a phone book and watched as Stacy flipped through the thin, yellowed pages. Finally, she found the address. There indeed was a house on the property we just hadn't seen. Stacy read the address aloud, matching it to the field's location. It was them. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number listed in the directory. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, curt and weary, like she'd already been interrupted one too many times that evening. "Hello?" Hi, ma'am," Stacy stammered, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Sorry to bother you so late, but we were driving by your property, and we thought we saw a white horse out in your field. We just wanted to make sure it hasn't gotten out." There was a pause, an uncomfortable, drawn-out silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I leaned closer, holding my breath, straining to catch every word. Then the woman let out a long, exasperated sigh. "For the last time," she said, her voice sharp and brittle, "we don't have a white horse." My heart dropped. The way she said it, like she'd been repeating it for years, like people had been asking her the same question over and over, sent a cold, prickling chill through my entire body. "What do you mean?" Stacy asked, confusion and fear lacing her tone. Are you sure? Because we..." Click. The line went dead. We stared at the phone, stunned. Stacy looked up slowly, her face pale as a ghost. She just hung up on me," she whispered. "Because we're not the first to ask," I murmured, dread coiling in my stomach. "People have seen it before." The silence stretched out for an eternity. I looked out the window and rain had begun to soak it. I imagined the rain falling onto the ground of that field, where the horrible crime had taken place so long ago. I hoped that the life-giving water would wash away the stains of the past. And maybe that thing would go away. But I knew better. Evil like that doesn't just wash away, it lingers. The creature was there because of the sins of Robert Usted. That horrible act had tainted the ground of that place, and only something unholy could call it home now. But that made me wonder, what the hell had we seen? The darkness grows as we move into the next tale of terror. Love. Dark, cold, and stormy. A typical horror movie setup, Audrey thought, on her way to her house. She had been shopping earlier that day, and yet still, all alone on Christmas Eve. Not even a Christmas miracle could save her from her grim fate of being alone. She had always been labeled an outcast, always rejected, no one to write home to for the holidays, no one to spend time with. She was desperate, always searching for something that would never come, yet still staying hopeful. On her journey home, the only sounds accompanying her silence were the raindrops lightly hitting her car's recently painted roof. She arrived at her home and came to a sudden stop in her front yard, as her garage was being renovated. She didn't need the extra space, but she figured if she and her future partner could start a family together, it would come in handy. The loud crash of the door slamming shut echoed into the sky, being muffled by thunder. She pulled out her keys from her right back pocket and produced a melodic jingle. The keys fell, as always, and Audrey, under her breath, muttered, "Fuck," as her dog began barking. The sound, although small, she figured, was loud enough to have awoken her dog sleeping peacefully in the kitchen. She opened the door. No comfort, no warm greetings, just her cold apartment. Her dog had stopped barking, and she called out to it, "Come here, boy, Mama's home." The rain had suddenly stopped as she repeated her calling, although louder. She could hear her dog whimpering, but she couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. She frantically tried flicking the light switch, but the power was out. She was visibly scared. Darkness takes all the comfort of knowing what's around you away, distorts your vision and memory, and makes it completely unknown. She stumbled into her living room, trembling. The whimpering stopped, and a sense of calm washed over her. Still not able to see anything, her eyes had adjusted to the dark, and she could just barely make out her furniture and decor pieces. She thought nothing of her lounge chair, except she didn't have one. She walked back to the kitchen, unpacking all of the groceries she had just bought, but was interrupted by a loud thud. She turned around, facing the dark, facing her fear. Is anyone there?" she whispered with a higher-pitched voice. The chair had started to move. Her vision? She rubbed her eyes, but it kept on moving, edging closer to her until she could just make out the corners of a grin, white eyes, pupils as black as the night sky, dilated fully, letting every bit of Audrey in. She froze, cold, standing helplessly, a towering figure standing in front of her, looking at her from above. Everything went silent. She had been knocked out by the man, hit with a small blunt object, a bat. She awoke with her hands chained, eyes covered, and mouth stuffed with some material. She felt bumps and heard the screeching of a car. The rain was back, but lighter this time. Old-timey music filled the car she was in, vibrating against her back. The car stopped, and a door was opened. She stayed quiet to hear if someone had saved her. Why stop? She could faintly make out, between the sounds of raindrops, the crackling of leaves. The compartment she was in was forcefully opened. She lay stiff as a statue, feeling her kidnapper's gaze upon her. She was picked up and carried, 2 doors being opened. She knew it was a building connected to the outside world because she could feel the rain on her. She was thrown into a room, and the door was shut. She managed to move her hands a bit, as the cuffs were loosely stuck onto her hands, not fitting correctly. She removed the blindfold covering her eyes and looked around. She was quickly hit with the image of the man, this time seated, looking over at her. Bald, dark eyebrows, a well-defined jawline. He let out a laugh, very low-pitched, and spoke no words. She was silent, just taking it all in, still frozen in fear. She was intimidated. The man got up and hit her with his bare hands, her cheek turning red. She couldn't speak, only whimpered, and the man continued laughing but turned his back to her, lying on the ground. Audrey began crying, and everything went silent again. The man had left. She had never felt this hopeless before. Through her sobbing and whimpering, she fell asleep. The man once again entered, and by her went to his knees. He started stroking her hair, tangling it with his fingers. He had also always been lonely. Audrey abruptly woke up during this time and could make out through a faint buzzing the sobbing of her kidnapper. He trailed down, resting his hand on her thigh. Although the situation was dire, she had never felt affection like this before. A part of her liked it. The other was terrified. The man fell asleep next to her, holding her close, giving her warmth. Inner peace came over both of them. Perhaps the unknown wasn't all that bad. Hours later, Audrey was woken up by the piercing, screeching sounds of metal being dragged over something repeatedly. The man started walking over to her after he saw her shock and twitch from fear. Heavy footsteps, homing in on her. Each step produced a deep thud, each one hitting harder than the last as they got louder until they stopped right in front of her. The man's hands covered her face. They felt like leather. Her blindfold was, this time, taken off, and the object in her mouth as well, and she was face to face with her captor. He wasn't bald, just had very short hair. Sunlight from a crack above shone on his face. His eyes reflected the most pure green color Audrey had ever seen. Looks can be deceptive. His pupils were now small, still black, with a white dot shimmering from the center. Audrey was speechless, and the man shook, turning around in an instant, covering his face. He began sobbing with his back turned to Audrey, lying on the floor. She spoke. No, don't cry. I think you look pretty." The room went silent. The sobbing ceased, and he asked her, "Do you mean that?" while rubbing his nose and eyes. Now facing her, Audrey nodded. He brought her up to her feet, towering over Audrey, looking down. She felt like an ant in the presence of a giant, a snake. Separated by an arm's length, Audrey was still stiff. She was shocked by the man. How could someone that wants to hurt you be so genuine and kind? She wondered. Perhaps they were more similar than Audrey could ever care to admit. He looked into her eyes, picking out the deepest corners of her darkness. From within, it bled through. It bled through to her eyes. Audrey loosened up when he seemed to calm down, and once again, she felt at peace. She had always longed for someone who could understand her. She was still terrified of change, not of him. She wasn't a people person ever, but someone taking her made her feel wanted, a sickening sense of dread coexisting with her need to feel whole. Although not speaking much, they spent hours together, just looking, staring. Some say beauty lies within the eyes, but the man had found more of her to love. He had always wanted this too, but fear is stronger than love, both primitive by nature, both misunderstood by all. Hatred filled him from tip to toe. He was an angry man by nature, although appearing collected. His insides were a mismatch of bits clinging onto each other, held together by weak glue, his will to be better. Suddenly, he snapped. He was too vulnerable. He threw her down and hit her once more, out cold. Audrey abruptly woke up once again in his car, this time without her blindfold. She could see a lever. She could escape, but where would she go? She didn't have anything. Without him, she was nothing. Although fast, she had felt attracted to him, a feeling she had never experienced before. She stayed put, but this time no music was playing, and she could only hear the tires skidding. They stopped, and he took her out. They stopped in a wooded area. The sunlight from before had faded, and it was pitch black. He spoke, this time more high-pitched, looking at Audrey, straight into her eyes, searching for something, although he didn't know what. His words, "I've always loved you, Audrey," came straight from his heart. Deep down, he too was vulnerable. It pierced her, and she just held him, gripping tightly. He followed it up with, "And we have to be together forever." Audrey nodded, agreeing, both with tears in their eyes. He forced her to let go as he walked to the back of his car, rummaging through everything. Audrey could only hear metal clashing together. After stopping, he pulled out a shovel. Audrey didn't feel fear, as she couldn't see him. She was looking down. As abruptly as it had started, it had ended. Everything went black, and the man put her in his passenger seat, happy once more. Audrey was never alone. She just didn't know where to look. I was always with her, always in love. Her shitty little boyfriend won't miss her anyway. But not all horrors remain in the past. The next story is one you'll never forget. I think death is following me. I've had a lot of near-death/spooky experiences the past 3 days. First, it was finding some bones, most likely as small animals, such as a baby deer or raccoon, and later realizing they were in the shape of my first initial, which I of course walked over and scattered slightly before I could get a picture. Normally I like spooky things, and sent the picture to one of my friends who I thought would appreciate it, as they also like weird/spooky things. Until they replied back that it looked like it was meant to be in the shape of an N, and to be careful. Next, while out tidying up the yard to start a garden next spring, we just moved in a few weeks ago and no time to start planting anything this year, I kept finding bits of sharp metal and a hodgepodge of nails and screws. I tripped over something in the yard, a large rock most likely. It's very rocky here, and nearly stabbed myself in the eye with an oddly new-looking and red-painted screw. Very odd, as we haven't done any carpentry around the house, let alone outside. I've also found bits of broken glass of different thickness and a few of different color, yellowish and gray-green, but these vanished from the nest pile I was collecting in the same area. Yesterday, while taking up leaves in the side yard, a large oak branch suddenly gave way and nearly hit me. When my husband went out the next day to buck it down and clear it away, he remarked, "Holy shit, honey. They call those widowmakers for a reason. That was the branch that missed you?" Today I was out for a walk with our 87-pound German Shepherd on the easement trails shared by between properties of us and a few neighbors. We're on a very rural/mountain area, and it's usually quiet of people noises, but lively with small animals, insects, and birds. I didn't notice right away that it had gone quiet. Unnaturally quiet. That is until my dog started snarling and snapping in the direction of the manzanita just up the hill, a short distance from us. Then the birds occupying the bush next to it all burst into flight as one swarm. I didn't hesitate. I called for my dog to turn, but had to grab the handle on his harness. Thank goodness I decided to put it on him in the event that we ran into the neighbor's mastiff, and we headed back to our house as calmly as I could manage. The sound I heard, ripping towards us from the undergrowth, was not something I have ever heard before, and I don't want to again. Was something between the low roar of gale force winds and a metal band lead singer's growl. It had some odd undercurrent to it that sent shockwaves through the primal part of my brain, demanding that I run, and now that I was somehow able to push down and ignore. We just made it back into the house, and as I was twisting the deadbolt into place, I heard the cry, previously a low, reverberating bass, crescendo with a snarl. Now I wish I'd had the presence of mind to record the noise, but fumbling to do so might have given whatever it was time to attack. Now I'm terrified of leaving the house. As that story comes to a close, another begins, darker and more twisted. Where the Bad Cops Go, Part 1. I write this as a reminder to put all that I've seen and heard into words. For far too long, I've looked back on these past few years as something impossible, something that happened to someone else. But that's far from the truth. Even if the truth and I have always had a tentative relationship at the best of times. Consider this a confession, a peek behind the curtain of something I never would have believed. Let's start from the top. My mother was a police officer in a busy metropolitan area. I never wanted to be a police officer like her, but it seemed inevitable. No matter what I tried to study, I would always fall back on that familiar role, the law keeper, arbiter and diplomat, the one who settles disputes and held people to their word. For a while, I thought I might get into politics, but I get too flustered in debates. I can't stand a dishonest argument, so politician or lawyer were not an option. So when I say that I never wanted to be a police officer, that's God's honest truth. But I had to be. It was the only thing that made sense. My mother died of cervical cancer in my last year at the academy, so when I finally got to walk my own beat, I couldn't help but to feel that I'd replaced her. My handler was very understanding of what I was going through, so when it was time to hit the streets, she cut me a lot of slack. A little too much, it turns out. See, there was this one part of the city that my handler told me to actively avoid. Whenever we got a call originating from this one area, my handler actively ignored it, unless it was something akin to an ongoing shootout. It got to the point where we would respond to calls, only to never show up. It was shady as hell, but practice is often very different from theory. I thought it was some kind of unwritten rule. Turns out, it was a lot worse than I'd imagined. My handler and a couple of other officers were economically involved with what can best be described as a smorgasbord of illicit dealings. Ignoring calls allowed both traffickers and dealers to run rampant, and we got a cut of the deal. Well, they did. The union swept a lot of it under the rug. 3 officers quit their jobs and went into private security. But I didn't want that. I still felt like I had my mom's boots on. I was in her place. So when it was my time to plead my case, I did what I could to make a fair and reasonable argument. But as I've said, I'm not good in debates. I remember the chief looking up from his papers as an advisor whispered in his ear. He gave me a concerned look. Obviously, we can't keep you here, he explained. But if you're really up for it, we got something in mind. But you gotta be really up for it. I agreed. Hell or high water, I'd do my job. This is how I ended up as a rookie in the Tomskog Police Department. Tomskog is a shitty little rural Minnesota town in the middle of nowhere. If you don't know where to take an uncomfortable left off the highway, you'll miss it. There are no signs, and most people who move there never leave. It's like a social black hole, the equivalent of unsubscribing from all internet platforms and walking into the woods. According to the chief, a lot of officers with questionable backgrounds were given a chance to work at Tomskog PD. Not because they desperately needed people, but because it was a good way to gain some brownie points with the local government and keeping the union happy. In fact, people with questionable ethics were encouraged at the Tomskog PD. I thought it might have to do with a lack of action. I mean, a bad cop can't really do any harm if there's nothing to do. I got to the station on a foggy November morning after a hasty over-the-weekend move. There was space for 2 squad cars on the lot out front, but both were out on patrol. A shoddy white plastic sign with Tomskog PD hung outside, along with the town seal, a blue sunflower on a golden shield. I'd never seen those things before I got to Tomskog, but all of a sudden, they were everywhere. 6 people looked up from their desks as I entered. Most of them paid me no mind, but the sheriff painstakingly got up from his chair to greet me, a man in his early 50s with the build of a human meatball and the handlebar mustache of an ex-wrestler. He reminded me of a cartoon character, only with less of a smile. "Mason Brooks," he said, offering a meaty hand. "My condolences." "Excuse me?" "My condolences," he repeated. I imagined him too excited to be here. Yeah, no, I said, happy to be of service. "You shitting me?" He laughed. "Well, ain't you the belle of the ball?" He gave me the tour of the place. The armory, the evidence lockup, the holding cells, and of course, my desk. If he hadn't pointed it out, I would have thought it was taken already. There was an unwashed coffee cup and a candy wrapper on it. "Don't mind that," Mason said. "People kind of come and go. Didn't figure this place would have that kind of turnover. You'd be surprised." He picked up a name sign from the edge of the desk. It was blank. I met my partner as he abused a vending machine. He was a balding man in his late 30s, wearing a kind of pinkish round sunglasses that made me think of John Lennon. I offered him a bill to try the machine again, but he waved me off. "If you hit it just right, you don't have to pay," he said, giving the machine another bashing. Mason just grinned. Business as usual, it seemed. "This is Nick Aitken, your partner, and for the time being handler," Mason explained. Again, my condolences. "Shit, didn't I just have a partner?" Nick asked. "Either I haven't had my morning Irish or someone's beaten my head straight because I can't see 2 of you." Mason frowned. "Desk is empty, name's gone, time for a newbie." "Right, Nick shook my hand as a Coke rolled out. He seemed more eager about a free Coke than to have someone watching his back. Mason gave me an apologetic smile. "He'll show you the ropes," he said. "Man's an idiot, but you'd do well to listen. Shucks, idiots live long round here." "He ain't joking about that," Nick added, not looking up from his Coke. And with that, we were on our way. Nick fired up a cigarette long before we left the station, then took me round the back to a civilian vehicle, an egg-white Volvo with rust stains that reminded me of bird shit. "All squad cars taken, huh?" I asked. "Yeah, folks are cleaning up after Patrick." "Sorry, what?" "You'll see. Maybe." Tomskog has a single main road stretching through the entire town. There was a gas station, a high school, a couple of shops, a peculiar flower shop at the corner that seemed to only sell those trademark blue sunflowers. There was a sort of upward tilt on the west side of town that made the houses look stacked on top of one another. On the other side of town was a vast lake, eloquently named Frog Lake, where houses stretched out along the western ridge. It was a peaceful enough place, and in the right light, you could tell it was someone's home. But like with most little towns, you can't imagine what kind of people live there. It's like when you see a house in the middle of nowhere. Who chooses to live there? What happened? I guess I hadn't yet come to the realization that I was about to become one of those people. Nick pulled up next to a corner pub, a place that looked old enough to have grandchildren. Before getting out of the car, Nick gave me a tired look. "We're just going to talk to a guy," he said. "He never comes into town unless there's something shitty going on. We're going to have a chat." "Got it. Don't ask him any questions. Leave that to me. And don't touch him. He's a bit contagious." "In what way?" "Every way that matters," he sighed. "And what did I say about questions?" "You said not to ask him any. You never said anything about asking you any." He tilted down his pink sunglasses, giving me a tired look. Shaking his head, he got out of the car. "I give you a week, rookie." Stepping into the pub, there was only two other people present. The owner, a sturdy man in his 70s who seemed transfixed on a thick-screen TV that played mostly static. The other was a man in his 40s with long, dark hair. He had a couple of silver streaks running along his ears, a clean-shaven look, and a trucker cap. Much like Nick, the guy seemed comfortable wearing sunglasses indoors. "Digman," said Nick. "You drag your sorry ass back to town, huh?" "Meeting family," the man smiled. "It's a special day. You gonna cause any trouble?" "Of course not." "Let me rephrase that," said Nick, throwing me a tired look. "What kind of trouble you causing?" "Nothing," the man replied. "Just meeting family. Maybe going for a walk." Nick wasn't very happy with that answer, but there was little he could do. They said their goodbyes and we stepped outside. The moment we got out, Nick fired up another cigarette and called it in. "Digman's up to some shit," he spoke into the radio. "Keep a tail on him." Mason's voice came through. They didn't seem to bother with codes or formalities. "Nick, you're a snake. You're all tail. You stick to him." "Come on," Nick groaned. "The newbie can do it." "Do we need to have a discussion about the division of labor, Nick?" Nick took his hands off the radio and looked up at the sky with a sigh. "No, sir." That was our first assignment, spying on a civilian for no obvious reason. We saw how he met a shady-looking young man in his 20s, and the two of them spent a lot of time talking, eating nachos, and catching up. Meanwhile, I was trying to pass the time by getting to know Nick and the town a little better. "Tell me something," I said. "What makes being a cop here different from everywhere else?" Nick adjusted his sunglasses. "We don't sign reports," he said matter-of-factly. "What do you mean?" "I mean what I said, rookie. We don't sign reports." "Of course you do. Everyone does." "Well, we don't." He looked back at Digman through the window, deeming him not to be an active threat. "I mean, yeah, we got paperwork, but we don't really do it," he clarified. Say you find a dead guy in an alley with his throat slit. What'd you do?" That's a crime scene. You gotta." Nick worked up an error sound, like the wrong answer at a game show. "You say it's an accident, you file it, and that's that. That's what you do." "Hell no." "Hell yes you do. And you know why?" He turned to me, looking over his sunglasses. Something stern came over him. "Because if you don't, people die." He explained it as best as he could. The Tomskog PD never truly investigated anything on paper, because if they did, there'd be people coming by to ask questions. Questions like why people kept getting murdered, or why there were so many accidents out by Lake Attabat. And with questions, there'd be investigators, reporters, and government agents. We can't have that, Nick continued. They don't understand this town, and they'll get themselves killed. We're doing a necessary evil to keep the lid on. That doesn't make any sense. 35 people died here last year, Nick continued. In a town of 7,500-something people, you know where that puts us? That's the highest murder rate in the country, by a mile. Hell, we make St. Louis look like a cotton candy petting zoo. Doesn't make sweeping it under the rug any less shitty. More than half of those who died were outsiders. Relatives, good Samaritans, passers-by. If we can stop them from coming here, that means less dead folks stuffed in containers around the high school. He turned his attention back to the pub, leaning back in his seat. Without looking at me, he asked, "So if we find a guy with a sliced throat in an alley, what do you say?" I ain't saying it. Play ball here, newbie. I ain't asking, I'm telling. I swallowed my pride. The sheriff had asked me to listen to this man, and I wasn't about to mess up on my first day. I didn't like where this was going, and I wasn't buying that whole shtick, but I wasn't going to make any enemies. Not today. Sounds like an accident, I said, rolling my eyes. Awful stuff. A goddamn tragedy. Over the next few days, Nick and I tailed this Digman fellow, but there wasn't much to see. He kept to himself most of the time. Instead, we ended up going around town, responding to various requests and reports. Mostly domestic stuff, but a few odd cases popped up here and there. For example, every squad car had a BB gun for shooting frogs. We spent a good couple of hours on that. When asking about it, Nick just told me we did it to keep folks from catching the nastiest headache of their lives. He did not elaborate. There were other cases as well. We had to get a woman who'd eaten a bucket of dirt to a hospital. We had to take down fake stop signs that someone had put up by the road leading out of town. Once a week, we had to go to the closed-down Tomskog Public Library and burn a copy of the Diary of Emmett Rask, who seemed to come back on its own. It was clear that this town was nothing like I'd imagined. This wasn't your average small-town kind of living. This was survival in a place where basic rules of life seemingly came and went, much like the many rookies of Tomskog PD. Over the weeks to come, I was having trouble adapting to life in Tomskog. We were filling out half-assed reports that sometimes outright lied, and no one seemed bothered by it. I started to feel a sort of resignation. My colleagues took notice, but there wasn't much they could do. Nick was actually pretty sweet about it. He tried to show me around town and introduce me to the various folks who lived there. It was clear that he was making an effort in his own casual way. I got myself a small house at the far end of town, just off the main road. The prices were ridiculous. I could afford a 2-story, 5-room house as a single woman with a police officer's salary. Despite that, I settled for something a bit smaller. I figured the prices were just going to drop further, so any buy was a loss. But with the numbers we were talking about, it didn't really matter. Still, getting settled in Tomskog was just odd. That's the best word for it. I barely considered myself a police officer anymore. I felt like a street sweeper. I wasn't serving or protecting. I was systematically ignoring problems for money. And not only that, but I was expected to do so. The turning point came on New Year's Eve. There were 4 of us staffing the phones, but most of us had mentally checked out hours ago. I was playing games on my work computer, and the other 3 were having a dart contest in the break room. Nick was about 4 beers in. I almost missed the phone ringing. We had one line for rerouted calls from emergency services and a direct line. I'd never seen the direct line ring before. I answered it. "Hi there?" A woman on the other end said, "This is Miss Babin. I'm going to have to ask you to send a few officers." "What is this concerning, ma'am?" "I'm not entirely sure," she continued, "but I think something is affecting the residents." "Something?" I asked. "Like an animal?" "You better put Nick on the line, dear." I called Nick over. He had a short conversation with the person on the other end, then slapped his own face with an open hand. "Shit!" he whistled, and the others perked up. He cleared his throat and put his hands on his hips. "We got a situation at the Babin building. We're heading out." There was no discussion. Whatever it was big enough to make Nick put on a serious face. I don't think I'd seen him really do that until that point. I drove. It was the first time we turned the sirens on. Nick was checking his handgun over and over. "This is Digman," he groaned. "I dunno how or why, but it's gotta be. Man's a menace." "You two got history?" "Everyone's got history with Digman. Bad history." I took a right, following the northernmost road to the outskirts of town past the gas station. There was an apartment building with several cars parked outside. The moment I stopped the car, Nick was out the door. The others weren't far behind. I ran to catch up with him, and as he opened the front door, he called back to me. "Oh, and don't talk to Roy. He's a freak." The moment I stepped inside, I could taste some kind of chemical in the air. Ammonia, maybe a bit of chlorine. Nick didn't seem too bothered by the smell, but I could tell he was worried. He turned to me as we got to the stairs. "You want to protect and serve, right?" "Yeah," I said, blinking at the question. "Of course. Then get to the top floor and start moving people. This place is contaminated." "With what?" "No idea. I'm going to check it out." While Nick went to speak with the landlord, me and the other two officers went up the stairs. The others stopped short of my floor, but I kept going. The smell was getting stronger, and I could feel it settling in the back of my throat. Some sort of chemical spill. This thing was going to stick to their furniture, no doubt about it. I knocked on the door of the top floor. Someone rushed to open it. I figured they'd been waiting to get the all clear to leave, so I relaxed a little. But as the door flung open, I didn't face a thankful citizen. It was a woman in her early 60s. Her pupils so widened that they looked black. I'd seen plenty of people on drugs before, but this was a whole other level. She stared at me with this huge grin, and as she did, I saw one of her teeth fall out of her open mouth. It clattered against her homemade welcome mat. Before I could introduce myself, she attacked me. She had this blue tint on her hands, like she'd accidentally washed them in some kind of ink. That's where the smell was coming from. It had the same powerful chemical stench to it that the rest of the building was bathing in. Those hands dove for my face, as if she wanted to pinch my cheeks. "Little wheat," she laughed. "You came to the harvest?" She was surprisingly strong, but she had no technique. My heart skipped a beat as I got a meaty slap across the chest, and she tugged at my radio, but I managed to wrestle her to the ground. I put her in a hold that would make a grown man cry, but she laughed like a shrieking maniac. As I handcuffed her, I could see other doors around the floor open. There were 3 men in their 20s, still wearing party hats from their New Year's celebration. One with the blue stuff coming out of his ears, another from his mouth. The third looked like he was crying it. Another door with what looked like a married couple and a young girl. Yet another door with an older man wandering out in nothing but his stained underwear. All of them with those blackened pupils and unearthly smiles. Some of them getting an occasional twitch, like their nerves were settling in cold water. "Little wheat," one chuckled. "She comes willingly. We are blessed. We are so blessed." And still, the old woman under my knee laughed herself hoarse. I was outnumbered. They sprang to action, rushing me, almost tripping over one another. I dove into the old woman's apartment, kicking the door closed with the heel of my boot. I hurried up to lock it, and as they piled up against the door, I tripped backwards, knocking over a vase. The attackers were throwing themselves at the door with wild abandon. Yes, she plays," someone laughed. Come see the harvest." "Little wheat." I was cornered on the top floor. I touched my radio, but I couldn't get a message through. Everyone was talking all at once. I wasn't the only one panicking. This wasn't just happening on my floor. I had my taser and my firearm. I was trying to make sense of it in my head. Sure, it'd probably get swept under the carpet one way or another, but I'd never fired my gun at a living person before. It was my first time going to be firing openly at 7 civilians, one of which was a child. Was I even capable of that? But as the door buckled and the door frame creaked, I was going to have to make a tough decision. Would I fight to live another day, or accept whatever may come? What kind of protect and serve would I represent? Another slam at the door. I needed time. I needed something, anything. So I ran into the bathroom. I backed into it, locking it the moment the front door came down. The lights were off, and all I heard was this light drizzle, like someone had left the shower on. I turned the lights back on. My eyes stung. The smell was so pungent that it burned my nose, forcing me to sneeze. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. There was an old man on the floor. It looked like he'd slipped and slammed his shoulder against the side of the toilet. He couldn't get up. He was almost entirely covered in that blue sludge, and I realized it was still running from the shower and the tap. He was looking at me, his eyes wide and black, his face half smiling at me, partially paralyzed. "It'll eat," he lisped. "It'll eat." Banging on the bathroom door. Laughter. Anywhere else, that'd just be what New Year's Eve was supposed to sound like. But to me, it was a promise. There was no doubt in my mind that these people would do something horrible to me if they got the chance. I had my hand on my service weapon, trying to figure out what to do. I've never been great with debates, not even in my own head. I kept going back and forth. I could do a warning shot first, then I'd go for kill shots as soon as that door budged. Or should I go for the leg? Should I do something about the old man? Was he a threat? Did I have enough bullets? "I am armed and ready to defend myself," I called out. No response, just more laughter and nonsensical gibberish. My hand was shaking. I was more scared than I'd realized. "I will fire," I yelled. "I am warning you. I will shoot to kill." Nothing. If anything, it just made them cheer even more. Louder. "Eager wheat. Little wheat. Little wheat. Come to the harvest." The radio came through. "Nick, what's happening up there?" "They're breaking in the door," I yelled back. "I need backup." "Hide," he screamed back. "Can you get to the bathroom? I'm locked in." "It's that chemical thing. It makes him crazy." I looked at the shower. It was still running, making a viscous goo that dripped at a steady pace. The door buckled. I saw the flash of a black-eyed grinning face as the hinges struggled. Another voice came through, the woman from the phone. She was using Nick's radio. "They use the smell," she said. "If you can smell like them, they won't attack." Looking at the running shower, I had an idea. It sounded insane, but this town didn't play by the rules. I was going to have to adapt. I put my service weapon away and pulled down the shower curtain, wrapping it around and over me like a cocoon. Then I stepped into the shower. I watched the blue goo run off of me. Even through the plastic, it felt warm to the touch. Whatever this was, it was downright toxic, no doubt about it. As the door gave way with a crackling wooden bang, I pushed myself into a corner, hoping for the best as the shower kept running. They all slowed down to look at me, all those eyes turning my way. Even through the blue-tinted haze of the shower curtain, I could see their exaggerated grins, their nonsensical words rotating into something new, something calmer. "Joined the harvest. Yes, yes, joined. The Reaper came. Thank you, little wheat." I clutched the shower curtain close to me, begging that I wouldn't get any blue stuff on me. It ran right off, but soaked into the soles of my shoes. I can't overstate how awful the smell was, and as we all stood there looking at one another, I was coming to terms with just how screwed I might be. They could reach me in less than a second if they wanted to. And even if they didn't, the fumes of this thing would be enough to send me sprawling to the floor in a matter of minutes. I wasn't getting any air, no matter how hard I breathed. It was like my lungs were coated with something sick. I was blinking to stay conscious. What the hell had I been thinking? This was like trying to save yourself from drowning by wrapping your head in a plastic bag. It was just another way to suffocate. I couldn't feel my knees, but they were locked upright. But even with the tiniest sway, I'd fall like a Jenga tower. And that'd be it. I felt my fingers touch the tip of my service weapon. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could just kill them all and be done with it. But no, I couldn't. I was losing control. I couldn't move my thumb. I'll fire, I wheezed. I have a right to defend myself. I dipped in and out of consciousness, leaning against the wall. There was commotion in the other room. A couple of people left, a few stayed to look at me. I could hear the crackling of a taser, breaking furniture. I didn't recognize the voices, but I could hear the trained cadence of other officers. I must have blacked out at some point. I tried taking a step forward and ended up collapsing on the floor. The shower curtain unfurled, all covered in blue, staining the floor like one of the town's trademark blue sunflowers. I ended up face to face with the old man. We shared a moment just looking at one another across the bathroom floor. Him grinning like a maniac, me just trying to stay conscious. "Why are you smiling?" I whispered. Because it's all a joke, little wheat, and it's so funny. Seconds later, someone grabbed me by the shoulders. I was dragged out of the apartment, getting a quick look at what happened. We'd gotten back up, 4 other officers, including Sheriff Mason himself. The attackers had been tased, zip-tied, and handcuffed. They'd just pushed the kid into a wardrobe and barred the door. As my vision cleared, I watched Nick taking off my boots. "It hasn't soaked through," he sighed. "You'll be okay." "Sorry, I didn't help." "You kidding?" he scoffed. "No casualties. A couple broken bones and a few bruises, yeah, but these people are going to be fine." He looked back into the apartment. They were still writhing around, moaning about harvests and wheat. Nick shrugged, looking back at me. "I mean, kinda fine." In the hours to come, the remaining people were evacuated. Most folks would recover after a couple of thorough scrubbings. Others had to be hospitalized. I spent the next few hours sitting in our bird shit civvy Volvo, trying to figure out if my legs were to be trusted yet. I could still taste the ammonia. I was going to need 100 showers. I caught a conversation between Nick and Mason. The sheriff was furious as to how they hadn't prepared for this. Nick recounted every call we'd checked out over the past few weeks, and nothing stood out. That is, until he got to John Digman. He said he had family in town. Nick explained. They were going to catch up. "Going for a walk," I smiled. "Doesn't sound too bad." Mason turned to me, slowly, then back to Nick. "Go for a walk?" Mason frowned. "He said that? John Digman said he was going for a walk?" "Not specifically that he was, but..." "Yeah," said Nick. "So what? And you're telling me this now?" Mason looked like he was about to beat Nick with his own shoe. Instead, he bit down on his handlebar mustache like an improvised binky. "He's doing it." Mason sighed. "That rust-brained possum fuck is going to do a goddamn year walk." "A what?" Mason pushed Nick up against the hood of the car, pointing at him with his entire hand. Mason was pissed. More pissed than I'd ever seen him. "A year walk? Get your mom's tits out of your ears and perk up, you scab-faced shit-licker." "A year walk?" Mason walked away, putting his phone to his ear. He looked back at Nick from the other side of the parking lot, still screaming at the top of his lungs. "Call the duck. Tell him we need 2 of everything, 1:15 yesterday." Nick calmly walked to the driver's side of the car, opened the door, and sat down. He took off his pink-shaded sunglasses and buried his face in his arms, leaning against the steering wheel. For a moment we just sat there, breathing together, as if there was a chance this would all blow over any second, if we could just hold on a little longer. Nick leaned back, keeping his eyes closed. I felt like I had to say something. "I take it that calling the duck is bad." "Yeah," he nodded. "It's bad." "How bad are we talking?" He looked at me with a kind of earnest sympathy that I'd never seen in him before. This was taking a toll, a real toll. This wasn't silly glasses Nick, this was I got bad news Nick. He opened his mouth, but all that came out was a stutter. Finally, he just threw up his arms in surrender. "No idea, but it's as bad gets. This is the emergency glass you break after all other glass has already broke. The alarms that other alarms pull to get out of trouble. It's the worst." "I'm counting on overtime then." It was a comment to lighten the mood, but Nick just shook his head. Without a word, he got out, leaving his pink sunglasses behind. He walked off, screaming expletives as he dialed the longest number I'd ever seen. All the while, the New Year's Eve celebrations were going strong. Rockets and lantern lighting up the sky to distant cheers. Warmth was returning to my hands and feet. I was starting to understand. When they said the town of Tomskog was unlike anything else, this was what they were talking about. It wasn't just some hick town in the middle of nowhere. It was a place where the rules are different. And where rules are different, laws had to be different. This wasn't just the place where the bad cops go. We were a necessary evil. And in the months to come, that was going to be a hard lesson to learn. You think you've survived the worst? Prepare yourself for the next chilling tale. We were trapped in an abandoned suburb part 6, finale. For previous story, watch our previous video. We ran into the Eye Ripper house and locked the front door. I closed the curtains of the front windows, but not before seeing the wraiths we had disturbed in the forest flood onto the pavement. Some of them shambled, some of them floated, some of them sprinted, some of them even seemed to glitch forward like they were teleporting. Yasmin shuddered and hugged herself, as she sat on the sofa pushed against the wall. It was just a minute before those things began banging on the front door, a cacophony of ghostly utterances bleeding through into the house. "Come on, we're going into the basement," I whispered as I tugged Hugsmeen along to the kitchen. "There's a way we can escape in there if they get in." We ran into the basement and shut the door behind us, sitting on the top step and listening in case one of those things broke in. It felt like an hour had passed, with the distant sounds of ghoulish wailing and fists banging against the front door aside from our soft breathing. I heard footsteps in the kitchen and felt fear shoot through me. They got in. As I stood, the doorknob twisted as someone tried to get through the basement door. "Come on, Yaz." I grabbed her shoulder, ready to make a break for the crawl space. Then, "Dude, Grace, it's me. Open the goddamn door." Vanessa hissed from the other side. I unlocked the door to the sight of the blonde alt girl holding the sachet in one hand and pinching her nostrils closed with her other hand. She seemed to be panting, her forehead beaded with perspiration. "Where's that fucking ghost kid?" she asked, the look on her face making it clear she was fed up. I had to outrun so many of those things, and I got in through the back door, but now they're blocking that exit too. "We'll use the crawl space." I took the sachet from her and handed the camera back. "I don't know where William is, but the Ouija is down here, so we should be able to call him." I led the way back downstairs. After collecting the Ouija board and planchette from where it had been thrown the last time we used it, we set it up in front of the furnace and sat ourselves around it. We didn't have candles, but we set up flashlights to illuminate the area again. I squeezed Yasmin's hand, noticing the faraway look on her face. "Are you okay?" "I just want this to be over," she replied, shaking her head. "Let's get it over with then." Vanessa took a deep breath. "Is the spirit of..." The ragged scream of a woman alongside frantic banging against the basement door resounded throughout the room. Vanessa, did you lock the back door?" I asked slowly. Vanessa blinked at me. Give it back." The only words I could make out among the wails, whispers, crying, and laughter leaked through the basement door. "Give us our eyes back." "You didn't." Spit flew out my mouth as I glared accusingly at Vanessa. "Fuck, I'm sorry, I forgot." Tears ran down her cheeks. "We're just lucky they can't go through fucking walls." I spat, looking down at the board. "Just hurry up and say the words." "Is the spirit of William Crawford present?" The words rushed out of Vanessa's mouth clumsily. "We have something you might want." "There." Yasmin pointed behind Vanessa, scaring the living daylights out of her, as she whirled around and saw the apparition of the brunette little boy peeking around the corner of the entryway to the other room. "Here." Vanessa hastily snatched the sachet from me and raised it to him. He crept forward almost shyly, emerging from the shadow into the flashlight. I stood up and grabbed the sachet back, staring at the spirit with a hard look on my face. Vanessa and Yasmin looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Grace, are you an idiot?" Vanessa demanded to know. William reached his white fingers out, his eyeless face contorted into a frozen expression of rage from the moment he appeared. His mouth was open in a way that implied he was yelling, not in fear or pain, but anger, and his dark eyebrows were furrowed over his empty sockets. His presence felt like death, as if the Grim Reaper were looking over us, and the edges of his flesh were transparent. He seemed the most inhuman out of every entity we had encountered. His skin so light it was nearly transparent, an intricate spiderweb of black veins visible all throughout his body. He was more ghost-like, even compared to the other kids. He almost seemed like a hologram or an image displayed in front of us by an old-school projector. "If I give you this," I began after swallowing the lump in my throat, "you have to let us go, and you have to set free all the souls you've trapped here. They weren't responsible for what happened to you, and what you're doing is very bad." There was silence, as William seemed to stare at me with the two dark pools set into his face, no humanity evident in him at all, from the way his body was frozen in the same rigid posture, with his hand reaching to his face not moving a muscle. Then, a slow moan, like an injured zombie, croaked from deep within his throat as he was suddenly inches closer to me without ever moving his legs. Still reaching for the sachet. "No." I snapped, lifting it away from him. I could hear Vanessa's labored breathing behind me as she panicked at my rash actions. "You have to promise, pinky promise." Sticking my pinky out, I tried to appeal to the little kid that was likely still hidden deep within the evil that had corrupted his soul. There was another long silence as his head tilted down with him staring unwaveringly at my pinky. Then, the rage-filled expression quite literally faded from his face, like a PowerPoint transition, into a look of regretful sorrow. His eyebrows were upturned, and his mouth shaped into a quivering whimper with wrinkles spread along his chin, as if he were about to burst into tears. His hand, without any sort of motion, switched from expectantly awaiting me putting the sachet in his hands to holding his little pinky out. I linked our pinky fingers and shivered as his flesh felt like touching a hard block of ice. Then I gave him his eyes back. He cradled the sachet in his cupped hands, the same look of silent weeping frozen on his face as he, like all the others, rescinded into the darkness and vanished. His presence departing felt like Armageddon storm clouds withdrawing from the sky and making way for a smiling sun and wispy clouds. The atmosphere seemed lighter. The banging and hollering outside the basement had ceased. The three of us hugged, crying in the basement, which now felt safer as it was relieved of that oppressive atmosphere it had before. Instead of escaping via the crawl space, we walked out the front door. The ghosts from the woods were still out there, but now their backs were facing us, and they were calmly walking away down the street. We were happy to find that John had forgotten his keys in the house when he left earlier, although it was bittersweet knowing we would use his car to get out of this mess without him riding along with us. Vanessa, being the only one with the ability to drive out of the three of us, took the driver's seat and inserted the key in the ignition. She placed the camera on the middle console, next to Yasmin, who was riding shotgun. I sat in the middle of the back seat and buckled my seatbelt as she made a U-turn and drove slowly out of there. I watched the Eye Ripper house and the unfinished suburb get smaller on the horizon. I also watched the spirits leaving with us, and among them was John, Bryce, and Zach. Vanessa cried softly as we passed them, sniffing snot back up her nose and wiping her face. I felt numb and simply observed them as we passed, same as Yasmin. The ghosts didn't have their eyes back, but I wasn't too concerned. I assumed that if they were walking out of this place without attacking anyone, then they were free. William had honored my request. The sun was rising, finally. The peachy light of dawn entered the car as we drove along the road flanked by trees. I rolled down the window a bit and heard birdsong, and a bug smacked against the windshield. The critters were back. "That place," I said. "I think it was another realm." Vanessa nodded. "Yeah, that explains why nothing living was there and why none of those missing people's cars were found. That car graveyard in the woods was so creepy. It's so creepy that they hid evidence of people being there. Now that I think about it, all that stuff people left behind must have appeared after we entered the realm. When we left the basement, it seemed like less stuff was in there. At first, I thought we entered the realm when we did the Ouija board thing. But then, I got to thinking, it must have happened as soon as we stepped foot in that basement. The basement was basically a gateway, and... Her rambling became white noise as I looked out the window, reflecting on everything, and being so relieved I was finally going home. Then I looked at Yasmin's window and my heart stopped. She was looking almost wistfully out the window as well, and thanks to the light of daybreak I could see her reflection in the glass. Her reflection was eyeless. Immediately, it felt like the air was short and it was impossible to breathe. No, 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 not her too. Anyone but her. I closed my eyes and rubbed them vigorously, hoping it was a hallucination brought on by stress and trauma. When I opened them again, Yasmin was peering around the headrest of her car seat, looking straight at me. "Grace," she said as I flinched, "I don't feel very well at all. I think maybe we should stop for a moment." Vanessa frowned as I felt the entire world crumble around me with the realization we were going home with an entity in our car. "What?" "No, Yazzie, I want to go home. You'll feel better when we get there." My mouth opened and closed. I looked like a fish gasping for air. My brain faltered as I searched for the words I needed to say amid the wave of dread that washed over me like a tsunami. Yasmin stared at Vanessa, her expression blank. Vanessa noticed and gave her a weird look. "What's the matter with you?" "I just feel so empty," Yasmin replied as she looked away. Vanessa," I said shakily. "Maybe you should pull over for just a second. I think I'm about to puke." I knew what I wanted to do at that moment. Once we stopped, I was going to convince everyone to get out of the car and then find a way for Vanessa and I to get in without Yasmin, lock the doors, and get the hell out of Dodge. Just like I did with Zach and Bryce. Vanessa groaned, beyond agitated at our insistence to delay our arrival home after the hell we've been through. "Look, I don't want to stop until we get to town. We're just a few minutes away now. I'm not stopping in these creepy-ass woods." I mentally cursed her stubbornness and looked at Yasmin's reflection in the window again, still eyeless. An idea came to mind. She may have been dead, but she was still my friend. And after all, William had stopped the curse, hadn't he? What if I could convince her to get out of the car and go to the other side or wherever all those spirits were headed when we left? Would she panic, realizing she wasn't alive, or would she refuse out of sheer denial at her fate? I tried to put myself in her shoes, and I thought that I would deny it too, demanding to be taken home to my parents. Or maybe, just maybe, she would disappear when we got home. Yeah, ghosts had unfinished business, and maybe she was so set on getting home she didn't even realize what happened to her. Maybe once we got back, and she saw her family, she would disappear. So I waited. I stupidly waited, keeping the awful truth to myself as I stewed in my anxiety. But then, oh my God, Yasmin inhaled suddenly. "I can't take it anymore. It fucking hurts." "What hurts?" Vanessa shot her a concerned glance but kept her eyes on the road. I mentally begged for her to realize what was going on. "Did you get injured?" Yasmin inhaled again, a sharp intake of breath. She put her fingers in front of her mouth and inhaled once more. This time it sounded more strained, gravelly and rough. "My breathing is funny. It's like I have to force it." Then, finally, she looked at her own reflection and saw what I saw. She stared for a good long while before she reacted, and I could practically see the cogs turning in her brain. But instead of screaming or crying, she grinned as if someone had told the funniest joke of the century and exploded into hysterics. She had completely lost it. Vanessa faced her, having had enough. "Okay, what the hell is going?" It all happened so quickly. Yasmin went from looking out the window 1 second to sinking all her fingers deep into Vanessa's eye sockets the next. Agonized screams spilled from Vanessa's mouth, colliding and harmonizing with my own terrified shrieks. The car swerved off the road as her hands shot up to her face, but it was too late. My best friend had ripped her eyes right from her sockets before she could even defend herself. A spray of blood coated the windshield as Vanessa screamed and writhed and thrashed and flailed. All the while, Yasmin sat back in her seat and giggled maniacally, turning the fleshy globes over in her hands and admiring them like they were prized marbles. I was so focused on watching the grisly scene that I didn't notice we were hurtling towards a tree. The hood of the car crashed into the trunk, crumpling so easily like paper wrinkling. I was thrown forward violently, as were they. Spiderweb cracks rippled throughout the windshield. Vanessa clumsily opened the driver's side door and fell out onto the ground, scrambling blindly. "Grace, help!" I could make out these words in between her string of pained and petrified babbling and spluttering. "Look what I won," my friend said in a boastful voice, bringing my attention from Vanessa's agonizing last moments back to her. Yasmin looked over her seat at me, showing me Vanessa's bloodied gray eyes, a cord of red flesh still hanging from them. She smiled, and I realized that her physical appearance now matched her reflection. I screamed and threw myself out of the car, fleeing for the road, and once I got there, I was determined to run all the way back home. I left Vanessa behind. Not only was I beyond scared for my life, but also I knew she would not last long with her eyes being ripped so violently from her skull like that. I was completely aware she had a few minutes at best. As I ran, I made the mistake of looking behind me. The ghost of Yasmin stumbled from the trees and onto the road, sadly looking after me. "Grace?" She called out to me unsurely, as if I was the one acting different. She sounded scared and confused. I couldn't help it. I stopped and turned to face her. She was far enough where her empty eye sockets looked like black pinpoints. "Why?" I wheezed out between panting breaths. Why did you do that to her? You're supposed to move on, like the others. I felt my grief trace wet trails down my flushed cheeks. Move on? Yasmin questioned as she steadily walked forward, her brow furrowing. She then smiled and slowly shook her head. Oh, no, Grace, there's no moving on. Then where are the other ones going? I challenged her, taking a step back with every step she took forward. Everyone that was killed in that place was set free. So why are you different? Yasmin smiled, sadly this time. Why did you abandon me, Grace? I thought we were friends. Suddenly, she was a few feet closer. She had teleported. Stay back, I warned, my breath hitching. But these don't work. Yasmin raised her hand and dropped Vanessa's eyes on the ground. I can't believe it. My best friend left me. She teleported another 5 feet closer and I gasped. We're still friends, I assured her desperately. If we're friends. She became still and her arms slowly rose, her fingers wiggling as they stretched towards me, as if she was beckoning for a hug. You can share your eyes with me. Her jaw unhinged, stretching her mouth into an oblong shape, and a croaking growl rasped from her throat as she suddenly glided forward without moving her feet, as if on ice. The groan coming out of her mouth sounded like a man with tuberculosis fighting for his last breath on his deathbed, while simultaneously turning into a bloodthirsty zombie. I turned and ran the longest I'd ever run. That was the most scared I'd ever been in my life. Before, I had people to run with, friends, allies who would help protect me. But right then, I realized that I had absolutely no one left. No one to hold my hand as we fled. No one to sacrifice themselves for my survival. I seemed to run for hours, looking over my shoulder occasionally to see her chasing me. She wasn't running. She was like a still image of herself, standing rigidly with her arms reaching and her mouth forming a silent scream, teleporting ever closer in a soundless pursuit. She had lost all traces of humanity. She was no longer the girl I had become friends with. She was infected by an insidious curse I thought we had vanquished. I've never run so fast my entire life for so long. I kept going and going, my legs and arms pumping, my mouth gasping for oxygen, my lungs feeling like shriveled raisins. There were times I felt her fingertips graze my back, and I propelled myself forward, pushing myself to my limits until I felt I would collapse. In an attempt to break from her line of sight, I lurched into the forest and stayed close to the road. I navigated the maze of trees until they started to thin out, making way for the town's first few buildings that greeted you when you entered. I looked back one last time to see her standing several yards away from me, her mouth hanging open wider, with her chin nearly reaching her chest as if furious at my escape. I ran across the street into a 24-hour laundromat, which was pretty much empty, aside from an old man asleep at the desk. I sat down and caught my breath, listening to old-fashioned music from the speakers fixed to the ceiling and trembling from head to toe. I felt like I had just escaped a fate worse than death. Like I had just evaded the depths of hell with Satan hot on my heels the entire way. I couldn't believe I made it. All I could do for a while was sit and sob. Out of 6 people, I was the only survivor. So there you have it. I already know what you're thinking, and no, I did not go to the authorities about this at all. The proof, the camera, was left in John's car, and I was damned if I would go back for that stupid device and risk my eyes getting evicted from my skull. I also knew how it may look. I mean, if the Eye Ripper's death looked like suicide to the police, then that supported my suspicion that those eyeless wraiths don't leave proof like fingerprints or hairs behind. If I were to tell them that Yasmin murdered Vanessa, what if they investigated and found no evidence of Yasmin doing that? I'm sure they'd find evidence she was in the car, but being in the car didn't mean she did it. Neither did her being missing. And I'm sure she would not appear to them as a wraith. They could easily say I killed both of them, and they just haven't been able to find Yaz's body. I may have been paranoid, I don't know. I used to watch crime shows sometimes with my mom, and it amazed me how many little ways they could nail a person for murder. I wasn't about to go to the cops when I had no idea how to explain anything, and I was so afraid. I returned home, thankful my parents were out for their anniversary plans. On the way back, I had concocted an alibi for when the police eventually came investigating the disappearance of my friends. I was going to tell them that I had decided last minute not to go to Zach's sleepover party, and they told me that they were going to the abandoned suburb. I stuck to this story, and when people went to investigate, they found the remains of many people in those woods, clearly deteriorated for some time, but appearing seemingly overnight, including the carcasses of my friends hanging limply from the trees, all with their eyes torn out. They found the cars and belongings left behind too. They said it was a serial killer trying to copy the eye ripper case, making people go missing, and that he was still on the loose. Thank God they didn't look for evidence of me being there. My nerdy goody two-shoes looks made people automatically trust my integrity. I was glad I wasn't a suspect at any point during the investigation. But I guess they figured a teenage girl who hardly left the house, which my parents would attest to, couldn't kill that many people anyway, so they ruled me out, despite being the last person to see my friends alive. I had saved myself from a lifetime of people thinking I was crazy for raving about eyeless ghosts. I know how it goes in the movies. Without proof, they never believe the lone survivor. And why would they? After all, I had been a skeptic too, and if I was on the other end, I wouldn't believe me either. I just had to endure being forced into regular therapy sessions, the constant stream of pity from my classmates who now felt obligated to hang out with me, and, of course, the overwhelming loss of my friends. I can never rest easy. I plan to leave the country for college and go to Japan or something. It's just, I keep thinking about what I have done. I set them free by asking the boy who started the curse, but that didn't actually fix the problem. That just unleashed a plague of eyeless wraiths outside the prison cell of a realm they had been in and onto the mortal world. I keep Googling eyeless murders and more homicide cases pop up over the course of months, spreading across the state and through the country, but then proof of them slowly are scrubbed off the internet. The articles just disappear soon after being posted, leaving forums of people who noticed this phenomenon and wanted to discuss it and share their conspiracy theories. The more superstitious ones think it's demons or aliens. The others think it's multiple eye ripper copycats, a cult of them, even, because it was clear one person wasn't doing this. They are ripping out eyes insatiably, and among these soulless killers are the restless and tormented spirits of my friends. I lay awake at night, knowing that when I close my eyes I'll be haunted by their eyeless faces. I just fear the day I encounter one of them again, and they will force me to join their ranks as they force the eyes out of my skull. And if that didn't send shivers down your spine, our next story surely will. Chayagar, I can't leave. For previous story, watch our previous videos I tried to run. I know, bad idea, but most of you haven't felt what I felt that night. At least I hope you haven't. For your own sake. There's little in the world that is more terrifying than your heart wrenching with fear as you lie in bed, drenched in your own sweat, eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling. Keenly aware of your own mortality. Any man, anyone, any living thing would want to get away from anything that makes them feel that way. So, I ran. Alright, I should probably slow down. Start where I left off last time. If you're new to this shtick, go start at the beginning. By the way, I thought I should provide you guys with an easy way to keep track of these experiences, if only to have a neat little log of my death throes. So I made an index on its own dedicated subreddit. I'll keep updating it as and when I post, so check back every so often if you're interested. In the meantime, if you want to discuss anything, feel free to drop a post or two there. I'll try to be involved, provided I'm not actively in the jaws of some monstrosity at that point. Anyway, after a refreshing afternoon siesta, it was time to meet my lawyer. I put on one of the clean white tunics the servants had left out while I was sleeping. As the evening fell, the air was growing chilly, and the wind was picking up across the open fields outside. So I had Banu bring me a shawl. Not carrying a good jacket or sweater had been an oversight. I had completely forgotten how cold it could get in these remote places at night, even outside of winter. What I did not forget was to swipe Ramu's knife off the table and stick it in one of my pockets. I was not making the mistake of being unarmed, even inside the house. My uncle was waiting for me as I threw the shawl around my shoulders and descended the stairs. He was similarly dressed in a woolen shawl and a tunic, his smile in its usual place. "Now you look the part, kid. All that shirt and jeans bullshit won't fly in this house." I chuckled, picking at the edges of the shawl. "I almost feel like I belong here, part of the scenery, you know? Almost." "Hey, this is your home." He walked up and grabbed my shoulder. "That remains true, no matter how many years you spend away from it. Your father did what he thought was best when he left. I don't blame him, but even he always felt its pull. Whenever something went wrong, he would be on his way here the next day. We never even needed to call. He just felt it, and he came back. He came back, and he died." He nodded. "And he died." "What happened that night, Kaku? I deserve to know." "You do." He sighed and took his hand off my shoulder, turning his back to me. "But I cannot tell you. He never discussed it with me, though I asked. Not with any of us. Only your grandfather knows what truly happened. At least he knew." "I see. I'm sorry." He looked back at me. "This place has painful connotations for you, as it has for all of us. You did not want to come back, and I can understand why. But you're here now, and your family, our family, all of us are with you. Whatever this is, we can handle it. We always have." I stepped closer to him. Grandfather could not do it, and he knew this land from birth. And through him and us, so will you. He faced me again. "On that note, we must speak soon, about the situation here. You've had enough excitement for one day, but tomorrow, come find me. There is information to cover. There are rituals to be performed. The coming of a new Thakur is a crucial time. Nothing can go wrong." "I don't understand. It'll all make sense eventually. Trust me, kid." "Trust me, kid." He gestured at the hallway. "The lawyer's in the study. You should go see him now. He'll explain the mundane side of things to you. Property, finances. You know it better than me." "That makes one thing," I sighed. "Thanks, Uncle. By the way, where are the others?" "My brothers? They're out for tonight. Working. You'll see them in the morning." He gave me a small wave, nodding towards the study. "Go. Don't want him to get mad." The study was exactly as I had left it in the vision. The only difference was the dust that hung like a thick pall over the room. Evidently, it had not been aired out or cleaned since the disappearance of its last owner. Mercifully, the power was on this time, so the chandelier-like light overhead was working, illuminating the room with a diffuse yellow glow. A portly, balding man in a suit struggled out of one of the chairs when he saw me enter, extending a hand. "Mr. Sen, so nice to finally meet you. My sincerest condolences about your grandfather." "Thank you." I gestured at him to take his seat and took one of my own. We faced each other across a small table. "Mr. Sen, my name is Jacob Durham, of Durham & Co. Solicitors in Kolkata. I have worked closely with your grandfather for a long time. I was shocked to learn of his untimely demise, and in such a tragic manner, too." I nodded. "It came as a shock to us all. Life has been a whirlwind ever since." "I imagine so." He produced a briefcase from behind his chair and set it on the table. "Of course, the association between our firm and your family goes back much farther. We have worked with your estate for almost 2 centuries now, ever since 1825. My father, and his father before him have all served your family, and now I get to continue the line with you. I understand you're here with details about the inheritance." I saw right through his attempts to create a sense of familiarity. It was a common trick of the trade, but with me, that relationship would have to be earned through competence. "Indeed." He sharply opened the briefcase and produced a few stacks of documents, lists, and diagrams. "I understand you are in our noble profession yourself." "Good. Then this should not take as long as I feared." It still took several hours. I won't bore you with the details, but it suffices to say that the implications are staggering. The manor and the surrounding lands were directly the personal possessions of the family, with some of it beyond the current boundaries leased out on long-term covenants to farmers. Beyond that, we held revenue rights and limited administrative rights over the entirety of the village land, as set out in the survey records he showed me. We also owned the forest behind the estate, as well as the mountain beyond it that served as the natural landmark before which Chayagar was built. Okay, I should probably explain the forest. I told you the land was dry and hard, and that's still true, but somehow, right at the base of the mountain, the place has managed to grow a lush, dense forest. Such vegetation density is not present anywhere else in the region. A part of the forest falls within our estate walls and contains the family grove, but most of it is outside, with only a narrow path winding through it to reach the steps that lead up the mountain. I theorize that the mountain caught what little rain the place gets and concentrated it there to allow the forest to grow. But knowing what I know now, there could have been some occult shit involved. In any case, I found out that there were even more remote assets. Townhouses in Kolkata and some other cities, satellite estates in the countryside, temple and shrine revenue, old hunting and lumber forests, business ventures, and even investment portfolios and commercial real estate. Even accounting for the maintenance and labor costs to keep everything functional, the property was raking in an absurd amount of money. Someone has been putting in the work to grow the pie, I muttered, rifling through some deeds that described stakes and offshore oil blocks in the Americas. The family has been accumulating its assets for centuries, Mr. Sen. Usually such estates lose a lot to mismanagement over the years, but I'm happy to report that such is not the case with yours. A lot to keep track of. I wouldn't worry about it. Most of these assets are handled by a network of trusts and corporations with experienced administrators. Trustworthy ones. We have spent a lot of time perfecting the governance structure. I will send the documents over if you like, but the gist is that we can take care of maintaining and growing the estate. You need only decide how to best spend the windfall. Your family has always invested heavily in the village, both for welfare and other, more esoteric purposes. Those ones I never fully understood. You and me both, Mr. Durham. You and me both. He shrugged lightly. I'm not paid to ask questions. In any case, if you ever need anything from the estate, let me know. We'll make it happen. One of you had prompted me to think about the legal status of our zamindari all the way back in my first post, so I took the opportunity to pop the question. Durham scratched his chin, smiling. That's a good question, Mr. Sen. Actually, there are laws on the books specifically about Chayagar, ever since the British administration, but we think these laws are based on even older laws. We have found firmans from the sultans and the Mughals specifically protecting your family's rights over this village, and decrees from the Hindu and Buddhist kings before them. They're really obscure and difficult to retrieve, almost redacted. But these laws all exempt this village from any land redistribution laws or other such measures. We keep checking periodically to see if all is in order, but in short, your family's right over this inheritance is specifically and particularly protected by legislation. It has been so for as long as we have records. Why were these laws passed? I asked, raising an eyebrow. We are not aware. Maybe your family lobbied for them. Maybe the government had reasons of its own. Either way, the better for you and the worse for them. He replaced the papers in his suitcase, leaving only a few out for me to sign. Feel free to go through these. They will confirm the estate handover, the continuance of the governance structure, and other procedural things. All routine. It took about half an hour more until I was done reading and signing. Then Durham took the papers and replaced them in his case. Despite the name, he looked as native as I did, so I guessed he must have had some English blood somewhere up the tree. Now, as for the personal possessions your grandfather left you, he rose to his feet and crossed over to a corner behind me. Excuse me. When he returned, he held 3 parcels of varying sizes, as well as a sturdy wooden walking stick. I had sealed these for safekeeping in my custody when I was instructed to, in accordance with your grandfather's instructions. I warrant that no one has tampered with them since I retrieved them, though I cannot know what happened prior to my arrival. I nodded. He was a little too formal with me, given his advanced age. So these are the articles he left me? Indeed. Firstly, he handed me the stick. Your grandfather's walking stick. It has apparently been a long-time family heirloom, used by 8 Thakwars before you. He wanted you to have it. Use it if you wish. I raised it to the light, studying it. I recognized the gnarly top, the darkish wood, and the simple metal tip at the bottom. Not just because I had seen it in that fateful vision. I remembered it well from my childhood. The telltale, comforting clacks echoing through the halls, indicating my grandfather on his regular rounds through the house. Then we have this. He opened one of the packages and handed me a gold and black ring, decorated with heraldry. A circular shield with a ribbon framing it, crossed over by a sword and a torch. 2 lions held it up on either side. There was no motto. That is your family crest. This ring has been used as a symbol of office by the head of your family since time immemorial. I recommend you keep it and wear it all the time. It is both priceless and timeless. I slipped it onto my left index finger. It fit snugly. In fact, it may have been the light playing tricks on me, but I could have sworn I saw it shift and change size, adapting to my measurements. A natural fit. Truly, you boys are born into this role. Durham gave me a polite smile before moving on to the next package. You own all the books in the family libraries and archives anyway, but your grandfather specifically insisted I hand this one over to your hands only. It took a while to track down. He had it in a bank locker all the way out in Singapore. He handed me a worn book. There was no title or name on the cover, but from looks alone, that was not surprising. It wasn't a novel. It was a journal. This book was not listed in the preservation records of the family chronicles. I had no idea it even existed a few weeks ago, except that I perhaps saw your grandfather writing in it once. But that was many years ago. What does it say? I turned it around in my hands, hoping some clue would appear to explain it all. Unfortunately, there was nothing. Durham gave me a crisp and incredulous laugh. Mr. Sen, you must think me an amateur if you are implying that I would rifle through my client's possessions. Please find out at your own leisure. In any case, he unwrapped the last package. It revealed a simple golden necklace, completely unadorned. The pendant held nothing except one large whitish stone. It was almost like a pearl, but the texture was off. What is that? I raised an eyebrow. I have no idea. I only found out about it when your grandfather told me to secure it in his study after he was gone. He was extremely insistent that you wear it at all times. This thing? It did not go with my fashion at all, to be honest. He shrugged again. It's yours now, Mr. Sen. Wear it, kick it, burn it, your call. But he really was very insistent when he called me up about it the night he disappeared. I perked up at that. He called you that night? Yes, shortly before he set out, from what I heard. That's when he told me to facilitate the transfer of the estate to you and hold on to these articles, for if, when something happened, he knew that he was going to. He said it was a possibility. Durham sighed. Your grandfather did this often, you know, planning for his own death. It wasn't even the first time this year that I had received such a call. I know he did something dangerous, something to do with this place, but he never let me in on the details. I never thought it would be real this time. He sighed again, pressing his fingers to his temples. Sounds like you were really close. More to placate him than anything else, I slipped on the necklace right then and there. I'm sorry. Family is family, Mr. Sen. Your loss far outstrips mine. He got to his feet, slowly buttoning his coat. Now, it is getting rather late. That more or less concludes our business. If you have any more questions, I am here till tomorrow afternoon. If there's something after that, well, I'm always just a phone call away. Though your grandfather preferred his letters. Either works for me. I got to my feet as well, and we shook hands. Good night, Mr. Durham, and thank you for everything. After this, dinner was another blur. Durham took his food in his room, I was told. I talked with my grandmother and uncle. Just polite chit-chat, nothing important. I think paying some compensation to Ramu's father was discussed. My uncle said he would take care of it. Servants were whirling in and out, replacing dishes and utensils. But my mind was elsewhere. On the ring, on the book, on the necklace, on the walking stick, of all things. Why did my grandfather think I needed to have these things? And these things in particular. Despite my curiosity, I found quickly that I was in no condition to burn the midnight oil. My eyes began drooping almost as soon as I entered the bedroom. The day had taken its toll. The journal would have to wait for tomorrow, I told myself. I took the ring off and placed it on the nightstand alongside the knife. I was about to do the same with the necklace, but as soon as I touched the clasp, my fingers tingled. A sense of impending danger stabbed into my skull like a knife. I decided to leave it where it was. Thank the gods for that. It was late when I snapped awake. The power had gone out again, but the room was still cool. The nights could get downright chilly here. That was not something to be concerned about. What was concerning was that it was getting colder and fast. My breath was beginning to mist, and the metal bed frame was icy to the touch. The cold was almost alive, malicious even, as it wormed its way deep into my body. I had never experienced it myself, but I imagined this is what people who fell into frozen lakes felt. Cold, deeper, and stronger than anything they had ever felt before. My joints barely moved, as if stuck in jelly. Soon, frost began to form on the ceiling, slowly inching its way outwards and down the walls. The only warm thing in the room was the necklace. Hell, it was scorching, like an open flame against my collarbone. At that moment, I was almost afraid I would soon start smelling burning flesh. Heat and cold. What a way to die. The same overwhelming sense of danger stabbed over and over into my brain, seeming to point towards the only window in the room. It was on the far wall from the door, behind and to the side of the bed. Slowly, forcing my neck to work through the chill, I turned my head to look at it. The room I had been furnished with had no balcony of its own. The only thing outside that window was a thin ledge, mostly decorative, though workers could attach scaffolding to it if they needed to do repairs. At the moment, no repairs are required. But all the same, there was a face pressed against the window. A pale woman with long dark hair cascading past her shoulders. She had a small smirk on her face, staring right at me through the glass. The stabbing pain in my head reached a new fever pitch. The necklace positively throbbed with heat, in tune with my quickening heartbeat. The window was locked, held in place by 2 heavy deadbolts. For now, those seemed to be in place. The woman had noticed my gaze upon her. Her smirk split into a full-on smile, and she leaned closer and planted a small kiss on the glass. Frost radiated outwards from her lips, crackling as it spread. I could feel my pupils dilate in panic. The cold was reaching an intolerable level now, deadening every inch of skin. I tried to sit up, but my muscles were spasming, working slowly and hesitantly, or not at all. The window was completely frosted now, with only a translucent outline of the woman outside visible. I saw her raise her hand and touch it. Then the thick glass exploded inwards, scattering shards all over the floor. The cool night air blew in, chilling the air even more. Along with it came thick, billowing mist, covering the floor and furniture until it looked more like a swamp than a room. A bare, slender leg extended through the ragged hole in the window, just almost gingerly stepping into the mist. The cold went up another few notches. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and every muscle was frozen to a standstill. I had little choice but to keep watching as the rest of her body followed, twisting like a serpent as it passed through the narrow opening. Frost began to climb up the bed and onto my mattress. She was tall and lithe, her jet-black hair falling over her face and all the way to the floor. The only things visible were one unblinking eye and that smile. She was clad only in a simple white sari, without a blouse in the traditional village style. Her bare abdomen was as pale as her face, almost chalk white. I had heard female monsters and ghosts had their feet twisted around to face backwards, but her bare feet were as normal and unremarkable as mine. Not that kind of monster, then. Slowly, she stalked over to the bed. With every step closer, the cold settled deeper and deeper into my flesh. My eyes began to struggle to stay open. Frost was climbing onto my hands and feet now. I tried to open my mouth and scream for help, but my jaw might as well have been wired shut. The only thing that escaped my throat was a pathetic gasp. Even the stabbing warnings in my head had faded to a dull, meaningless roar. Dimly, I felt her climb onto the bed, straddling me as she leaned closer and closer. Her fingers were colder than I even thought possible, as they gently wrapped around my chin and turned my face to gaze into hers. My, how you've grown. Her voice was low and rich, slippery like black ice. I felt my skin burn as frost spread from her fingers. I was practically hyperventilating now, rooted in place and helpless, but even that was growing difficult. My chest refused to rise. Breathing was becoming a struggle, a losing struggle. She let go of my face, running her hands teasingly over my biceps. They left a trail of chilling pins and needles. "Don't be afraid. I'm not going to kill you. Not for now." She placed both hands on my chest, squeezing lightly. Some of the cold withdrew. I could almost breathe again. My eyes flitted between her gaze and the knife on the table. Only if I could somehow get to it. Stabbing a visitor? Now, that's so rude. This close, her eyes were a deep, almost blackish blue, like the dark underbellies of Arctic oceans. If I wanted to harm you, do you think I would have got past the defenses so easily? Do you think I would have let you wake up at all? My voice was still non-functional, but she must have glimpsed the question in my gaze. Why are you here then? Why? To help you, of course. I'm your friend, Tuckler. Don't you remember? We've been friends for a long time. The frost was climbing up my arms, but even through the haze of cold, I recalled a few half-forgotten snatches. A pale face watching from the edge of the wall as I ran around the courtyard, tossing a ball back and forth with a smiling woman in a white sari, holding a pale hand as I trampled through the family grove. Had she been this cold then too? Good friends correct each other when they've been bad. Almost sensually, she drew herself across me, reaching with a slender hand towards the table and grasping the ring in 2 fingers. You know nothing of Chayagar's ways. In many ways, you're still that little boy, ignorant of the world and its dangers. Only this time, the dangers actually exist, and they want your head. The old things of this world hold no grudges for the innocent transgressions of children, but you are a child no longer. She nestled closer, almost lying on top of me as she ran a lazy finger over my brow. Even though it was somewhat reduced, the cold was still barely survivable. An involuntary squeak escaped me. Your actions, your presence, they have weight, meaning, and that makes them both dangerous and attractive. So when you know nothing about your situation, it's best to trust wise counsel. She reached down and grabbed my left hand by the wrist, raising it so I could see as she deliberately placed the ring onto my index finger. Wear the ring, at all times. She deliberately lingered on every word. I believe that is what he told you, darling. As soon as it settled on my finger, the cold no longer had a hold on me. The stabbing in my head stopped. I could breathe freely again, move freely. I tried to snatch my arm out of her grasp, but even at my full strength, she was far stronger. She smirked at my attempts, continuing in a sultry lilt. Cute. Your family name, its symbols, have power here. Power earned from a violent history. The things here have learned to fear that crest, even if they don't fear its holder. It will protect you from the worst of it until you can protect yourself. Remember that. She leaned down and kissed my forehead. Her lips were colder than anything I had ever felt, or probably will ever feel for the rest of my life. Frost spread at a blinding speed from them, growing and thickening until they covered my eyes with a solid, opaque mask. Good night, little boy. Sleep well, I'll be watching you. Even blind, I felt her presence shift and leave the room. A few seconds later, the frost over my face cracked, disappearing in moments like quicksilver. The room was back to its normal temperature again, the frost gone. Even the window had been repaired, the pieces held together by a meticulous webbing of ice. For what felt like years, I lay in that bed. Despite the cool weather, sweat poured freely until the mattress was damp. I tried to cry, but even the tears wouldn't come. I was too terrified for that. Then, just as suddenly, I bolted upright and got to my feet. I pulled on a shirt, leaving everything else where it was. Packing and taking the luggage would arouse suspicion. I had to go. Now. The house was dark and empty when I left the room, with only the knife in my pocket. The servants were all in the outer part of the manor, asleep. Only the family slept in the inner bedrooms. Neither my uncle nor my grandmother had been woken by the commotion. Good. No one noticed me leave the house. No one noticed as I crossed over the vast estate and silently slid out of the gate. Even the Lathiels were asleep in these wee hours, hugging their sticks to their chests. I had no idea how long it took to walk from the house to the edge of the village. It was a dazed blur. My head was empty of any thought, any instinct, except the feeling that I had to get away. I saw only the road in front of me. I felt only the steady thuds of my feet hitting the ground. I had forgotten to get my shoes. I was still in my house slippers. Damn it. A few villagers saw me, mostly young ones out with friends for late-night camaraderie. A few curious looks, but no one stopped or questioned me. Perhaps they, too, were afraid of the ring, or it might have been the blank stare. It only felt like seconds later that the tea shop and the road loomed into view, the familiar pillars opposite it denoting the bus stop. It was not dawn yet, but the sky was beginning to lighten. The shop was still closed and shuttered, It probably would not open for a few days now. Despite that, the bus driver was outside, sipping tea from a flask on one of the benches. He looked up when I approached. Unlike last time, he was wearing sunglasses that covered his eyes. "Hey, kiddo. I ended up staying the night. There were no more passengers on the route." "Why are you wearing glasses?" I managed. "Something wrong with your eyes?" He lowered them a little to stare at me, letting me see the inky darkness. "Just a fashion choice. You people are not the only ones who like to dress up. But what about you? Going somewhere? When do you leave?" He looked at his bus, still parked in the same spot. "In a few hours, I suppose. Why?" "Take me with you. Take me back." "I can't stay here." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "I can't." He looked at me for a few heartbeats. "No, no? What do you mean, no?" "You can't leave. Not now." "I'll pay you. How much do you want?" I clenched so hard that the nails drew blood. "Hell, I'll give you the entire estate if you want. Just get me out of here." Tempting, but you shouldn't make offers like that lightly. You have no idea of what you may end up giving away. "Look." "Shh." He raised a finger to his lips. "Stop talking. You can feel it, can't you?" "Feel what?" No sooner had the question left my lips than I felt what he was referring to. That sense I was slowly becoming familiar with. Dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of eyes, unseen, all fixed on me. The coming of a new Thakor is a momentous time, a crucial upheaval, especially in circumstances like yours. He lowered his hand, taking another sip of the tea. The land bucks like an unruly horse. Old boundaries, old laws, old understandings all become ephemeral. They are watching you. All of them, human and inhuman alike, getting your measure. If you try to run now, they will know you as a coward forever. "Better that than knowing me as a dead man," he sighed. "You don't understand, do you? For now, the reputation, the legend around you keeps the smart ones among them at bay. If you shatter that image, they'll pounce. You get on that bus with me, and you won't live to see the next village." My heart skipped a beat at those words. "But you can hold them off, can't you? Like you did with the spirals?" "Maybe. There are many fish in this ocean, and though I don't mean to brag, I'm one of the bigger ones. But a favor costs nothing. On the other hand, seeking my help yourself? Asking for it when I don't mean to provide it? That's a different thing altogether. That kind of support does not come cheap. There will be a bargain, and you won't like what I take. But even if you agree, even if I help you, even if you escape..." He sipped casually at the tea again. "There will be consequences." "That's what you keep saying." I wanted to get pissy again, but I remembered the cloaked man's warning. These things were quick to anger and slow to forgiveness. "But what do you mean by that? You have no idea of the power you hold, do you? The Thakor is not just the Lord of Chayagar, kiddo. He is its protector. More importantly, he is its gaoler." "Protector? Gaoler?" When one asks for an answer, one does not mean to be confused even more by it. But I refrained from making those feelings known to him. It is by your strength, your presence, your actions, that this world draws strength against the other one. This village sits on ancient land, where monsters crawl out of the crevices and morasses beyond the veil. It is powerful beyond reckoning, even to existences like mine. He finished his tea and set the cup aside. "That is why your family was given this village, young lord. Since your first generations, you have served to stem the tide, to hold fast against the horrors that stalk in the night, to intercede and mediate and solve disputes on the boundaries where the real and unreal collide. Just by being here, you shore up the defenses. You keep those who wish to hurt at bay, and you give those who wish to help a focus to rally behind. And you hold up the boundaries that keep them on this land. You disallow their escape. You prevent them from tormenting the rest of the world. Our family? Why us?" I managed to stammer out. There were 1,000 questions running through my mind, but that one came hurtling out before all the others. It was a selfish one, but be honest. Could you really blame me for being angry at being saddled with such a responsibility out of the blue? That I cannot say, but I know it is your sworn duty. You are dam, bridge, and fortress against the other side. If you leave now, when your influence is at its weakest, the walls will break down. Your power will collapse. Your family, everyone in the village will be left unprotected, and the slaughter won't stop with them. It will carry on. It will swallow village after village, town after town, city after city. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions will die. And death is one of the better outcomes in this situation. There are things that can do worse. Can't anyone else stop them? There are others, like you, out there. More competent ones. I'm sure they will eventually get it under control. But are you sure you want to be responsible for whatever happens in the meantime? I staggered over and collapsed on the bench beside him, burying my head in my hands. I tried to say a million things, but only one choked phrase made it out. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Go back, kiddo. Get some sleep. The sky was beginning to lighten to a faded blue by now. Dawn was coming. It was a mistake to come here in the first place. They have smelled weakness. Don't make it worse by letting them see your tears. The day is safer, especially now that you have the ring. Go back now, before anyone notices you're missing. He screwed the cap back onto the flask and rose to his feet, starting towards the bus. Best of luck. You'll need it. I raised my head, watching his rapidly retreating figure disappear into the driver's cabin. A few moments later, his head poked out of the window. Oh, cheer up. I'll bring you something nice for my next trip to town. No charge. After he drove off, I got to my feet and headed back to the manor. The sun was almost halfway over the horizon when I made it to my room. I tried to go to sleep, but my eyes just wouldn't close anymore. So, I got back up and typed this out. I can hear people beginning to stir in the house now that it's dawn. I don't know how much of what the bus guy told me is correct or completely accurate. But in case even a sliver of it is true, I can't take the chance. There is no way I can leave. At least, not until I figure this place out and stop whatever is hunting us. Both the woman and the driver? I suppose I should call him the ferryman, shouldn't I? Said that fear of our family keeps the things here in line. Well, whatever this creature is, it isn't afraid of us. I have no heir yet. If it kills me too, if no one is left to carry the family line forward, I don't know what happens. But it can't be good. As I write these last few lines, I can feel a little bit of drowsiness coming back to me, just as well. I think I'll sleep in for a bit and have a late breakfast. Grandmother would be disappointed, but I have little choice in the matter. After all, I have a long day ahead. As the nightmare fades, another stirs, waiting to pull you in. No one's there. After winning a lawsuit with my old job, I decided to early retire and buy a house where I can just spend the rest of my days and relax, work side jobs, and still bring in revenue. The house I bought seemed perfect for it. Big basement, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, huge living room and a kitchen where I can maybe learn to cook for myself, besides living off microwave mac and cheese with chicken strips. After I'd bought all the furniture I needed, along with some equipment and a few instruments, I could play on the sides, food, knickknacks, and even bought an aquarium for maybe some fish to keep me company, I was settled and ready to enjoy the rest of my life. I will admit I was eager to get through all this, and I didn't think to ask all the right questions when buying this house. The money got to my head a little bit, so the first few weeks were a blast. Had a few old co-workers come over and drink some beers, play some games, and even had a jam session. But honestly, after all that and being alone, I was lonely. Fish wouldn't keep me company. I never thought about dating again since my last breakup was recent, and it really took a toll on me. But I had to do something, and maybe I spoke too soon on the being lonely part. One night when I had fell asleep on my recliner chair with the TV on, I awoke to the sounds of my kitchen cupboards opening and closing. I sat up quickly and quietly shuffled to my closet and picked out a bat, thinking maybe someone broke in through the back door. I could hear a sigh and the sound of footsteps walking in my direction, and I was ready to swing at the intruder. As soon as the steps neared, I came down with my bat like I was swinging an axe, hoping to hit someone in the head, but no one was there. My heart pounded so hard from the adrenaline as I swung and swung again, but no one. Stupefied, I looked around and quickly turned on the light and see no one, running from room to room while turning on every light in the house, and didn't find anyone. I called out, "Who's there?" "Hello?" But I was met with silence, thinking maybe I was just losing my mind and still half asleep, but I could have sworn someone was in my kitchen. I could feel the heavy footsteps of someone walking towards me. I just couldn't explain it, so I shrugged it off. The next night, I was just getting home from a night out with a few friends, tired, slightly drunk, and hungry. I made my way to the kitchen and had my thoughts on a sandwich with all the right ingredients. An honest sandwich is what I called it. I was digging in the fridge and stumbling, trying to keep my footing, and as I straightened out, holding a bag of bread and chunks of sliced ham, I hear a voice. The voice of a man. Who's there? And footsteps coming from the living room. Startled, I dropped what was in my hands and stood there for a few seconds. Hello? And the footsteps once again came walking into the kitchen and could feel the vibration coming towards me and suddenly just stopped. Not moving an inch, I tried to comprehend what had just happened, and another voice from the upstairs. Bobby? Is that you? And more footsteps walking down the stairs, and immediately I walked to the kitchen entrance to look, but again, no one. Shocked and sobered up by the experience, sat in the kitchen the whole night, too afraid to move, but still very much hungry. I must have eaten 3 sandwiches till the sun came, and when I knew the coast was clear, I crawled upstairs and went to bed with my door locked. When I woke up, I texted a few of my friends and told them what had happened, and of course these fools were skeptical. I told a dozen people, but no one believed me. So later that night, I decided to stay home and possibly try and make contact with these people or things, ghosts, whatever. I came to the conclusion that my new house that I had bought and put so much into was haunted. I grew to the idea of it, and the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to pack up and leave, but this was my house, and I'd be damned if I'm going to be chased away from what I bought with money I somewhat earned. I sat in the kitchen at my table eating a mac and cheese microwave dinner with chicken strips. Sad, I know. Around 11 p.m., I had grown tired of waiting for something to happen. Even after a few beers and playing on my phone, nothing had happened. Maybe they got stage fright and moved on. I wish that was the case. As I downed my 4th beer, catching a decent small buzz, I slightly slammed the can down and sighed. All right, I'm going to bed. Grunting as I stood up and stretched out my arms with a big yawn while scratching my elbow. Who the hell are you? I hear a voice coming right behind me. I slowly turn around and see no one. I pause for a brief moment. Are you there? Here? I replied as my hands trembled along with my voice. Who's there? Where are you? Show yourself. The voice sounding like it was right in front of me as I waved my arms around and responded. No way this is happening right now. Hello? Being scared as hell, talking to an unseen force, I backed up slightly and felt this thing taking steps right through me and into the living room. I followed slowly. Hello? I whispered once more, and the stairs began to shake as if someone heavy was running down. As turned my head and looked. Fuck this. I let out the words as I grabbed my sweater, phone, and keys, then walked out the door to find the nearest hotel. For 3 days, I stayed in a rented room, telling my friends where I was. I tried to convince a few of them to come see for themselves, but they wouldn't. Either too scared, just thinking I was pulling some kind of prank on them. By day 4, I was sitting in the driveway of my house, hands on the steering wheel, and having anxiety of going back in there. There was just so much going through my mind at the time, but eventually I found myself in front of the door with my key in the lock. After a minute or two, I managed to go inside and slowly walked the house to look around, calling out to what was in my house, but nothing. Checked every room, closet, and bathroom, but nothing. For nearly a whole week, I never had any visitors. Ghosts, I mean. And I was just starting to feel relieved, thinking they maybe have just moved on, and I can finally have my peace and not be spooked by these things in my home. When the weekend came around, I had my friend Bobby come over to watch a UFC match. We ordered a pizza and had some beers, smoked a bit, and really just screamed at the TV throughout the whole night. It was a real blast and comfort that I had some normality coming back into my life. At some point, I got up and forgot I had to take out the trash. And so that's what I did. Grabbed a few big trash bags and went out the back door, stood on the back porch for a few minutes looking at the stars, and that's when I heard Bobby talking to someone. Maybe he was on the phone? Not sure. When I got back into the house, entered the living room, and seen Bobby laughing and talking to himself while on the couch, and he looks at me. Hey dude, just talking to your roommate here. Nice guy. Why didn't you ask me to be your roommate? I looked around the living room. Who? And he points behind himself. This guy. As he turned around, and he quickly turns to me with a shocked expression, and I just smirked at him. Told ya. I thought my haunted days were over, but apparently not, and I'm not planning on moving anytime soon, 'cause I paid good money for this house, and if I have to have these, whatever they are, then so be it. Every so often I'd hear someone talking in a different room, and I just choose to ignore it. Sometimes listening in on a conversation these ghosts have, and some really do come off weird, and at times just sounds like randomness of words. The stepping around the house is still creepy and wakes me up, but a little stern voice from me gets it quiet again. It's difficult at times, but I'm learning to cope. Even now, my friends hear it, and it's just normal these days. This is my retirement home, and I'm staying, and so are my unseen roommates. Just kinda wish they would at least pay rent. But that was just one story. Now, let me tell you about something even more unsettling. This one time at band camp. My first and last time at band camp. I was 13, but I was small for my age. I was also very skinny. I never really fit in at school. The only interactions I had with my classmates were of the other kids making fun of me. It didn't help that I was naturally introverted or that I was 2 years behind everyone else as far as size went. As a result, I didn't have many friends, or any friends, to be honest. The only thing I was good at was music. I played the saxophone, and I was actually pretty good at it. My parents decided to send me to band camp this summer to help me nurture my gift, whatever that meant. I heard them talking. My dad was worried about how much it would cost. My mom knew they couldn't really afford it, but they could make it work. My mom pleaded. She begged him. Joey needs to make some friends, and the only hobby he has is playing music. Maybe he can meet some people with similar interests and come out of his shell. My dad finally agreed, and when they proposed the idea to me, I couldn't refuse, knowing how much it meant to my mom. But band camp wasn't any different than school. I spent all day keeping my head down. I avoided eye contact with the other kids. One morning at breakfast, I found a giant spider in my oatmeal and screamed bloody murder. And everyone in the cafeteria pointed and laughed at me. A large, zit-faced kid plucked the rubber spider out of my oatmeal and presented it to the kids. They cheered and laughed harder, realizing I had been the victim of a prank. The next 3 days were relentless. Rubber snakes, itching powder, Bengay in my underwear. It went on and on with everyone laughing at me. Then, one of the instructors pulled me aside. Joey, they will keep picking on you if you give them the reaction they want. The next time they try to prank you, ignore them. If they don't get the reaction they want, they will move on to someone else. I took his advice, and for the rest of the day, I ignored them. Prank after prank. I avoided the urge to react. I even paid extra attention to my surroundings, which paid off when they tried to jump out and scare me. Tonight, we were supposed to play a piece outside as a group, but there was a storm coming in, and the rehearsal was canceled. The instructors were certain we would still have time to practice for the show at the end of camp when our parents came to pick us up. About an hour ago, a thick fog rolled in, and the kids have been talking about how you can't see 3 feet in front of you. It's werewolf fog, one of the kids yelled as he looked out of our cabin window. He turned to me and with spirit fingers repeated himself menacingly, werewolf fog. I ignored them. Joey, I bet you won't go out there. One of them challenged me. I kept my head down. Joey's too chicken. Another kid added. Immediate silence fell over the cabin when we heard the howl. A chill went down my spine and I almost lost my cool. But then I reminded myself of what the instructor had told me. They are going to keep pranking as long as I fall for it. There was another howl, louder and closer this time. It sounded so real. The other kids in the cabin were pretending to be scared and began looking out the windows. Then there was the scream, a loud, agonizing scream from outside. The kids kept up the act, and one of them proposed someone go get a counselor. Someone outside could be hurt. Another proposed they put the bunk bed in front of the door to keep the werewolf out. Finally, they agreed that Frank, the biggest kid, would go. He grabbed his flute and wielded it like a weapon and opened the door. Frank stood in the doorway for a minute, looking into the fog. I couldn't see the steps on the porch, and they were only a few feet away from the door. Frank tenderly stepped out into the fog. I couldn't see him anymore, but I heard the steps creaked under him as he stepped down. Everyone stared out of the door for at least a minute. There was complete silence, except for the sound of the group breathing heavily, and then Frank screamed. I heard rushed footsteps in the leaves as he ran back to the cabin. He plowed through the group at the door, knocking one kid to the ground. Frank collapsed right in front of me. He clutched at his throat. Blood spurted from his neck onto the ground and onto my feet. The other kids kept up the act and screamed as Frank gurgled and gasped. He stretched one hand out for me and then went limp. His eyes were wide open, staring at me. I have to give him credit. He may be a bully, but he is a great actor. He isn't even blinking. A kid, maybe a counselor, he's really tall, has just entered the cabin. He is wearing a werewolf costume. Somehow, fake blood is spraying all over the cabin as he pretends to maul my roommates. It looks so real. It even has the same copper smell as real blood. And the screams, the level of dedication they are putting into this prank is unbelievable. But I'm not falling for this one. I'm going to sit right here and keep writing this. Hold on. All of the other kids are playing dead. The man in the werewolf costume is walking over to me. I bet he's about to tell me it was a joke. If you thought that was frightening, the next tale will chill you to your core. The flood. In the distance, something stood. My view of the thing was obscured by the relentless rain that plagued our nights for the last few weeks. It was a figure behind a tree far out towards the end of our dirt driveway. It seemed like it was covered in a brown raincoat that dressed the entire length of its lanky body. I stayed there fixated at whatever it was. Was it a person just taking a moment behind a tree to get out of the rain? That seems odd, because these trees wouldn't give you too much cover. I contemplated while watching it, almost hoping it would move so I could confirm that it was human. It did not move. "Baby, what are you doing?" My wife called to me from the living room. Her tone was concerned. I hadn't come back to the couch to finish our movie. My eyes lifted themselves from the end of our driveway for a split second, and the curtain relaxed back into place as I turned to answer. "I'm just grabbing something to drink, sweetie. It's really pouring out there tonight." I thought to look back at whatever thing was out there, but I had already gave it too much of my time. It hadn't moved, and even if it was some random guy, I had the 9mm under my bed a few feet away. It may have just been a trick of the rain or something that fell off a pickup truck. It does make sense. The drivers here aren't good in the rain. I hear my wife answer me back in a playful mood as I walk back to her. "You better have gotten me something too," she said, her curly brown hair pulled into a sleepy bun and her legs tucked under some blankets. "What if I didn't?" I teased, sitting back to resume our movie night. "Well then," she chuckled, "I guess you just want to end up alone." Sitting on the couch, my mind wandered to what that thing was, but my attention was pulled in 3 different directions. I sat there watching the terrible horror flick we picked out and fielding questions from my wife. Maybe it was another tree that fell down and was standing upright, but I could have sworn it had shoulders and a head. It looked as if it was watching me from 50 yards away. I thought to myself, only half listening to what she had to say. Why didn't she grab the lamppost or something? Oh, she can break it and use it like a shiv, my wife declared, making a stabbing motion to the air. It's hard to think about these things in the moment. You're so filled with fear that you miss a lot of obvious things, I explained. Plus, they have to play it up for the suspense. The odd figure had eventually faded from my thoughts as we spoke. The tension left me as I focused in on the movie. It wouldn't even be on my radar until the next day when I heard about the flood. "She's the killer," my wife said, pointing to a character that I would have never thought was suspicious. "How do you know that?" I said in disbelief, trying to piece together her logic for this. As we watched the movie, we made pretend bets on who the killer was and why that made sense in the plot. I dug my heels in with an aloof male character that the group hardly acknowledged. I was confident that he was way too obvious. That is how they usually do it, someone you wouldn't expect. We shook on it, betting a fictional bajillion dollars on our suspects. She was right. She always knew who the killer was. A loud alert followed by frantic buzzing erupted from both of our phones late into the night. It forced us awake. I turned over to the bedside table to silence it. "It's probably an Amber Alert," I said, reaching for the phones. I fumbled the phones together, pulling them to the bed. The chargers snapped off as I did. I could have sworn I had silenced them, stopping any Amber Alerts in the nighttime from sounding. I thought about who the hell in their right mind is going to get up and go look for a stranger's child in the middle of the night. I felt annoyed as I unlocked mine and hers. My bleary eyes focused on the phone light as I held it up. The Face ID tried twice to open it, but there wasn't enough light in our room to make it work properly. All the while, the screeching alarm continued on. "Turn it off!" My wife begged from the other side of the bed. "I'm trying, sweetie. Hold on." When I finally was able to stop the alert on my phone, I worked on hers. I deftly entered her passcode and silenced it, thankful for the end to the blaring alarm. I laid my head back down and searched for the snapped-away chargers. But just as I was putting her phone back, I saw a text message pop up. This a message from the emergency broadcast system. There have been anomalous entities coming from the recently flooded White Oaks funeral grounds. If you see any of these such entities, do not be alarmed. They are reported to be harmless. Lock your doors and remain inside. Dial 911. Do not attempt to make contact with the bodies. Bodies? What the hell? I say to myself, coming fully awake. I look up the time. It's 3:23 a.m. I wonder if I should just head back to bed, but the text has me too worried to fall back asleep without getting some more information. I put down her phone and picked mine back up, searching in Google for my local news. I didn't have to look very long. Due to a recent massive flooding of the Greenway River, the White Oaks funeral home has been completely destroyed. The south section of the graveyard has become a part of the Greenway River, and many of the deceased have been unearthed, floating to the surface. Local authorities have since taken preventative measures to wall off the remaining parts of the... Another text comes across the top of my phone. "Tell her." My blood runs cold. I sit up in bed, breathing hard. My wife notices and lifts her head to whisper her complaints. "Alex, go back to bed," she says, half asleep. I have work in 3 hours. I slowly rise out of bed. The creaking spring sighing as my weight lifts off irritates her even further, but she just turns around and asks me to go to sleep on the couch if I can't sleep. I definitely wasn't going to sleep, not after seeing who sent me that message. "I don't think anyone is working today, baby," I said, pulling on the pants that I threw off before I came to bed. "There's a major flood going on, and they want everyone to stay inside." There was no response from her. She was done with this interaction. She wanted sleep first and foremost, and I couldn't blame her. That was fine. I had a lot to figure out. I walked into our living room, racking my brain to comprehend what's happening. The hard rain still beat down on the roof above, bathing the entire house in a loud static. I looked at our backyard from the door window, and the ground around our own patio was starting to look like a pond. I couldn't believe that this flood was powerful enough to raise the dead from the grave. This must be going on everywhere as well. The bones of whoever is buried there is being floated around the town on the current of this unrelenting rain. What was that about them not being dangerous? Of course they're not dangerous. Why would they specify that? I thought to myself for a moment, and then realized how religious our little town is, and how this could be seen from a religious perspective. Seeing the dead at your doorstep could send a few people into a frenzy. That's understandable. I pulled my phone out again and went to my text messages. It still sat at the top of the unread list. The message said, "Tell her." I had hardly noticed the message itself when it came. What sent me into a panic attack was the name attached to the message, Emily, with a heart next to the name. Emily Jenkins was my ex-wife. I killed her about 3 years ago now. It was around the time I was laid off, so almost 3 years. Who the hell is sending me texts with her old number? She's been gone for years now, and never once have I got a text from that number. It's got to be someone thinking I'm somebody else. I decided to reply back to the text. "Who is this? I think you have the wrong number." As soon as I hit send, 3 dots showed on the opposite side of the chat, telling me that whoever was on the other side was replying. Tell her, Alex. Tell her what you did. My breathing became unsteady and labored. I felt faint. The blood in my extremities began to leave me. The tingling feeling of numbness settled in my hands and feet, and my vision closed around me. This was a panic attack. I know it. I've been having them more frequently recently. I know that I'm not in danger, but my body says otherwise. I begin to pace around the room, trying to calm myself. There are ways to get out of this loop. You just have to ride it out. I placed my fingers on my neck, listening to my pulse. It's extremely fast. I focus. I'm okay. No one found out. I'm safe. I make myself repeat it out loud. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. I whisper to myself, my eyes closed. I can feel my heart pounding in my head. I crumble to the ground, trying to calm myself. Who is this person, and what do they have on me? How the hell did they find out what happened? I need to get the hell out of here. It's only a matter of time before whoever this is goes to the authorities. I need to grab the essentials and move quick. I have a sleeping bag in my trunk. I can buy some dried food from the grocery before I head to the gas station. My thoughts were wild. My brain went in every direction. I thought about how much time I had lost already. Who else knows? What did I miss? Why now? I had to calm down in order to make a move. I prioritized getting to a safe location. Keeping it simple will keep me sane. I stand up and head over to the front of the house to find my spare gas canisters. They're neatly stacked and ready for me in the corner of the room. Just as I go to grab the first one to tuck under my arm, thunder roars overhead. It stops me for a second as the entire house vibrates with its force. Oh shit, I whisper. This rain is going to keep me stranded here. I bet the roads are too flooded to even walk on. I strode over the window facing the driveway, opening the curtain to inspect the rain level. What my eyes saw, my mind could not comprehend. I stood there, unable to look away from the horror of the flesh hanging off the bones. The gaunt look it gave me from its shrunken black eyes shot a surge of adrenaline through me. Splashes of black hair laid wet on a rotten scalp. The uncovered bones of her mouth were yellowed like the dress she was buried in that day. Emily stood there, her withered and black ankles covered by the foot of water beneath her. She did not move, only seemed to stare. Her hanging jaw was agape with decaying skin, and the rain gathered in her mouth and overflowed. The fact that she was standing defied every iota of logic I had. Her legs almost nothing but twigs, barely even bone. The events of our life and her death played out in my head. I remembered our wedding and how her father insisted on having the first dance. Then I remembered how she fought me. She clawed and screamed until I finally around her throat. Then she just cried, or at least tried to. Sweetie? You okay? I jumped back from the noise. A soft yelp left my throat. I then realized it was my wife who came in behind me. She was hunched over, a heavy blanket covering her. Her hand was reaching out to touch my forehead as I turned to see her. Yes, I'm fine. Sorry, I just couldn't sleep and I just came in here just to tidy up is all. I say in a shaky voice. Tidy up? Baby, it's 4 a.m. She looked at me with doubt. Then she added, What were you doing? She went for the curtain and I tried to stop her from opening it. My hands grasped hers in a pleading sense of guilt. Baby, it's really bad out there, okay? We gotta get out of here. Maybe there's a hotel the next town over? I said, desperate to leave this town behind me. A hotel? Why? It's not that bad. She reached for the curtain again, and this time I could not stop her. She peered outside, and I watched her face contort slightly. Wow, it is really bad out there. But we can't get on the road anyway, not with your little Honda Civic. She smiled at me and looked back outside. I looked back outside, thinking she must have seen it. I pressed the blinds down to see, but there was nothing. There's no one there. I looked left and right, thinking it must have moved. I opened another section of the blinds and then fully pulled them up all together. My eyes scanned in distress. The rain beat down on our soggy front yard and thunder roared again in the distance. My wife continued the conversation without me. But it's not too bad, she said, shrugging her shoulders. The storm drains out there are still going and... Jessica, don't argue with me, I said, my tone even and voice dropped. I continued to stare at her, never letting up. Jessica, pack your bags now. It's not safe here anymore. Alex, calm down. It's just the wreck. I didn't even let her finish the sentence before I raised my hand with a threat to backhand her. As soon as my hand went up, she stopped speaking and flinched slightly. I had only had to hit her a few times, and she usually didn't get under my skin. But right now, I just wasn't in the mood for her talking back. My eyes never left hers as I pointed to the back of the house and slowly spoke the words as if I was talking to a toddler. Get your shit now. She seemed hesitant at first, looking back to me with that little prick of defiance I had tried to pry out of her when we first met. She stood there about to say something. As she started to speak, I snapped my fingers at her, pointing again to the back closet where we kept our clothes. She turned her head and started towards the bedroom. She didn't look back to me. I couldn't have her questioning me right now. Whoever this is on the other side of those texts knows what I did. I had to get out of there, rain or not, and she's coming with me. I'll get a different job. I can pull a few strings, no problem. The next few hours were spent emotionally detaching from my life that I built there while I prepped for a new one. It wasn't the first time I've had to do it. To be honest, it most likely wouldn't be the last time either. I had gotten pretty good at it over the years. I opened up the garage to the front of the house, half expecting to see Emily in my front yard again, but there was nothing and no one around. Just the strong surge of rain that whistled through the treetops and the occasional lifted truck passing by the house. I filled my trunk with camping gear, just in case I had to lay low for a while. I had a few propane cans for a portable grill that I tossed in there as well. My tent and my ropes were thrown in shortly after I neatly tucked away the axe and hunting knife into the hidden compartments of my trunk. Closing the hidden compartment, I paused and opened it back up. I placed the knife and sheath in my back pocket, feeling I would need it. I pulled out my wallet to see how much cash I had handy. Only $15. I planned on stopping by an ATM on our way out as well. I couldn't leave a trail right now. My phone vibrated. I fished my phone out of my pocket and saw that it was Emily's number again. Don't make the same mistake, Alex. I twisted around, looking out into the rain. Then I jerked around to look behind me, my eyes darting around the garage. I quickly knelt down to the concrete driveway and looked under the car. Where are you? I yelled into the onslaught of the storm. Stop fucking hiding, you coward. Whoever this person was, they were obviously watching me from a distance. I quickly ran and ducked behind the front of the car so they wouldn't see me from the outside. I peeked out, trying to make out anything in the rain, but I couldn't. They were watching me, waiting for me to come out. I needed to get my gun from under the bed. Jessica should be just about done getting her things together. I dashed to the front door, hopefully dodging whatever gun they had on me, and rushed inside. My shoes squelched. I was tracking mud on the floor as I walked back to the master bedroom. I didn't have time to worry about cleaning up. By tomorrow morning, I'd be long gone. I would be shopping for another place soon enough. I come up on the master bedroom door and see that it's closed. A fresh panic entered me when I went to turn the handle. Locked. Jessica? Open the door, okay? Are you almost ready, sweetie? No response. Jessica, open this fucking door. Cold silence. Jessica! Jessica! I yelled with intense fervor. I'm breaking it down, I yelled again. If she wants to stay here, that's completely fine. At this point, she can sit here and drown in the fucking rain for all I care. I can get whoever I want to replace her. That gun, though, is tied to me. If they start asking questions about that gun, then I got problems. I don't want to give the justice system any freebies. Plus, I need a gun for whoever this psycho is texting me. All I needed was to get that gun and maybe a few pairs of pants, and I could leave. I started to bash at the door with my shoulder and felt something buckle on the doorknob. The stupid bitch put a chair against the door. Jessica, don't play these games with me. It's not safe out here and we need to leave as soon as possible. Silence. Baby, listen. Look at your phone. The dead are being raised around us, okay? It's freaking me out and I just want to protect you. Jessica. I yelled back to her, hoping she would be persuaded by my words to open the door. It usually worked. I was able to play on her emotions pretty well when I needed her to do something. Alex, she finally responded. Just leave, okay? Just get out of here. I laughed at this. Jessica, Baby, listen, you're acting crazy, okay? You're not making any sense. I'm here to help you, I said to her from behind the door. It's okay, sweetie. I know you're scared. You just need to listen to me. No, she said, monotone. You told me you would never raise your hand to me again. You promised. Baby, listen, I'm just wound up trying to protect you. I would never actually do it again. After a moment of familiar silence, I heard the knob rattle as she removed the chair from the door. I gave her a moment, calming myself for the inevitable. She unlocked the door, and then I heard her scurry back away from it. I opened it slowly. See? How hard was that? All you had to do was... I stopped mid-sentence as I saw Jessica in full view, pointing my own gun at me. She had never handled a gun, but they're not difficult to handle. With one hand, I reached out towards her. The other I placed in my back pocket, readying my hunting knife. "Whoa, honey, what are you doing?" "It's me, Alex. Put down the gun, baby. No one's gonna get hurt here," I say calmly. "No, Alex." She cries, holding back tears. "You're gonna leave. That's what's gonna happen. So you get your shit?" The gun steadily pointing at my chest as she speaks with a desperate cry. "You're sounding crazy, baby. Look at you. You don't even know what you're doing." I laughed at her. "Is it even loaded?" She stood there, never budging. Her arms and legs are still. She stares daggers into me, never breaking eye contact. She's just like Emily. Right until the end, she stood here ground, never running. My knife rests securely in my hand, with the blade pointing down, so I could come down faster when I closed the distance. I stepped towards her. I just needed another foot or two. "Okay, you'll leave, but I just need that gun, okay?" "Don't come any closer," she demanded, the gun pointing to my head. There was a split second where neither of us spoke. I waited patiently. My knife was ready to cut the distance. We stood there looking at each other for a while. It was like we were strangers at this point. She was unrecognizable. Who was this woman with a backbone? It was such a shame, too, because at this point, I was going to have to kill her. She might be able to wing me, but I won't miss. He'll have to count on the fact that she will hesitate or miss. Then he'll be able to bring the blade down. He'll miss our movie nights when she's dead. Her hand falters slightly, needing a break from holding the gun aloft. This was my chance. I jumped forward, revealing my knife. My hand swings high in the air to prepare for a full swing down into her neck. She hesitates, just like I thought she would. Moments like this are difficult for normal people. Fear will overtake you and stop you from acting decisively. In the milliseconds before I connected, I could see the despair in her eyes. She knew was going to die here. There was no escape from me. As I lunged, the back window was illuminated by a flash of lightning. The sight caused me to pause and then stop altogether. I was frozen in terror. Emily stood in the window with her hanging jaw blowing hot breath onto the fogging glass. Her sunken eyes peered into our bedroom and her decomposing hands pressed against the pane. I knew she was looking straight at me. Bang! Jessica always knew who the killer was.